They say your wedding day is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. Mine was until my mother stood up, champagne glass raised, and announced to 200 guests that she was giving away my home. Not just any home. The beachfront property my husband's parents had gifted us as a wedding present. The house I'd personally designed as an architect. My dream, my work, my future. "We've decided to give it to Vanessa instead," my mother said, smiling at my older sister. "She needs it more." The room went silent. Cameras stopped recording. My sister actually laughed. "Relax, Camille. It's just a house." Just a house. I felt every eye in that ballroom watching me, waiting for me to crack, to cry, to make a scene. But I'd spent 34 years being the daughter who didn't matter, the one they could steal from the one who built things while my sister charmed people. So I did something they never expected. I smiled. I whispered one word: "Fine." My husband leaned in, his voice deadly calm. "Let them enjoy it. Their downfall starts tonight." You see, they thought they'd humiliated me. They thought I'd accepted defeat. They had no idea I'd been preparing for this moment my entire life. They didn't know about the legal traps already set. They couldn't imagine what I was capable of when someone finally pushed me too far. This is the story of how I made my own family pay for every stolen moment, every cruel comparison, every time they made me invisible. And trust me, they'll never forget the price. My name is Camille Rivers. I'm 34 years old, and until today, I thought I'd built a life my family couldn't touch. As the lead architect and co-founder of EcoVision Design, a sustainable architecture firm in San Francisco, I'd spent the last decade creating beautiful, environmentally conscious spaces that actually mattered. I'd earned every achievement, every award, every client through sheer determination and talent. But standing here in my wedding dress, watching 200 guests sip champagne under strings of lights along the California coast, I realized I'd been naive to think success could shield me from my family's cruelty. The ceremony had been perfect. Almost too perfect. The kind of flawless that makes you hold your breath, waiting for something to shatter. Ethan Carter. My husband of exactly 3 hours had looked at me during our vows, like I was the only person in the world, his dark eyes steady and sure. We'd met 4 years ago when he was considering investing in sustainable housing developments and needed an architect who understood both environmental impact and financial reality. Our first meeting had turned into a 3-hour debate about building materials and carbon footprints. I fell in love with him somewhere between his argument about solar panel efficiency and my counterpoint about aesthetic integration. The venue was everything I'd dreamed of, a historic estate perched on cliffs overlooking the Pacific, where waves crashed against rocks 100 feet below. White fabric billowed in the ocean breeze. Roses and eucalyptus created an arbor that smelled like California itself. The guest list read like a who's who of San Francisco society. Tech executives, prominent architects, city council members, arts patrons, and journalists from architectural magazines. My mother had made sure of that. Diana Rivers had spent months orchestrating this wedding with the precision of a military campaign. Not because she cared about my happiness, but because she cared about appearances. At 62, my mother was still striking silver hair styled in an elegant chignon designer suit in champagne silk pearls at her throat. She'd positioned herself near the entrance during cocktail hour, greeting guests with the practiced warmth of someone who'd spent decades climbing social ladders. I'd watched her introduce people to each other, collect compliments like currency, and mention Vanessa's name in nearly every conversation. Vanessa, my older sister by 3 years. She stood near the bar now, radiant in a pale blue dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her blonde hair caught up in artful waves. Vanessa had always been the charming one, the beautiful one, the daughter who knew how to work a room. She'd made a career out of being Diana Rivers' perfect creation, attending the right parties, dating the right men, serving on the right charity boards. She had no actual job, no real skills, just an Instagram account with 50,000 followers who believed she was some kind of lifestyle influencer. Throughout the ceremony, I'd caught something in both my mother's and sister's eyes. A gleam that made my stomach tighten. They kept exchanging glances, the kind of silent communication that excluded everyone else. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my lifelong experience of being the overlooked daughter was making me see threats where none existed. Ethan had squeezed my hand during the vows, and I'd pushed the unease away. But then came the reception. Dinner had been served, toasts had been made by Ethan's best man and my college roommate. The dance floor was full, music floating over conversations and laughter. The photographer was capturing what would look like perfect family moments. Diana posing with both daughters, Arthur, my quiet father smiling in the background. Everything was going exactly as planned. Then my mother approached the bandleader and asked for the microphone. The music stopped. Conversations trailed off. Diana stood in the center of the dance floor, champagne glass raised, looking radiant and maternal. "I want to take a moment to talk about family." She began, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. Guests turned to listen, smiling in anticipation of a touching maternal speech. Ethan's wonderful parents gave the newlyweds a truly generous gift, that beautiful beachfront property north of here. We're all so grateful for their generosity. She paused, smiling at Ethan's parents, who nodded graciously. But family means taking care of everyone's needs. And after much consideration, we've decided that house would be better suited for Vanessa. She needs it more right now, so we'll be transferring the property to her instead. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear waves crashing on rocks below the cliff. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. I felt every eye in the room turn to me, waiting for my reaction. Vanessa actually laughed, a bright tinkling sound. "Oh, Camille, don't look so shocked. It's just a house. You and Ethan have plenty. I'm sure you understand." The photographer had stopped shooting. The videographer had lowered his camera. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure whether this was some kind of joke they weren't getting. Ethan's hand found mine under the table, his grip tight. I felt my blood turn to ice. Not from shock, I'd learned long ago what my family was capable of, but from the sheer audacity of doing this here now in front of everyone who mattered in my professional and personal life. This wasn't just theft. This was public humiliation, carefully orchestrated. My mother stood there, still smiling, waiting for me to react. To cry, to argue, to make a scene that would confirm everything she'd ever said about me being too emotional or too sensitive. Instead, I smiled. I kept my voice steady and quiet, just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Fine." The applause faded. My smile didn't. I just whispered, "Fine." The word hung in the air like smoke. Fine. Such a small word to contain everything I was feeling. The rage, the humiliation, the cold clarity that was settling over me like armor. Vanessa's laugh cut through the tension, sharp and deliberate. She raised her own champagne glass as if toasting my compliance. "Oh, Camille, relax. It's just a house. You have Ethan, isn't that enough?" She gestured toward my new husband with a flourish that made her diamond bracelet catch the light. "Some of us aren't lucky enough to marry millionaires. We have to take what we can get." A few guests laughed. Nervous, uncertain laughter that people make when they're not sure if they're witnessing a joke or a tragedy. I saw phones come out, pointed discreetly in our direction. Someone was definitely recording this. By tomorrow morning, this moment would be circulating through group chats and social media. The story would spread through San Francisco's elite circles like wildfire. Successful architect humiliated at her own wedding. Mother gives away wedding gift to golden child sister. I could already imagine the whispered conversations at upcoming galas and fundraisers. The videographer, a young man I'd hired specifically because his portfolio showed he could capture genuine emotion, had lowered his camera entirely. Even he understood that whatever was happening right now wasn't something any bride would want preserved for posterity. The photographer had stepped back, melting into the crowd of guests who were suddenly very interested in their dinner plates. I felt Ethan's hand tighten around mine under the table. When I glanced at him, his face was perfectly composed, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his other hand had formed a fist against his thigh. He was looking at my mother with an expression I'd never seen on his face before, cold, calculating, absolutely lethal. Ethan had built his fortune by being smarter and more patient than his competitors. He knew how to wait for exactly the right moment to strike. My mother stood there basking in the attention, clearly expecting me to break down. That's what she wanted, wasn't it? For me to cry, to beg, to cause a scene that would confirm every criticism she'd ever leveled at me. Too emotional, too sensitive, always making things difficult. This was a test, a power play executed in front of everyone who mattered in my world. She wanted to remind me that no matter what I'd accomplished, no matter who I'd married, she could still reduce me to nothing with a single announcement. But as I sat there feeling the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on me, something shifted inside my chest. It was like watching a building blueprint come into focus, seeing the structural weaknesses in a design that had seemed solid from the outside. For the first time in my 34 years, I wasn't looking at my mother and sister through the lens of family obligation or desperate hope for approval. I was looking at them as what they truly were: opponents, adversaries who had just made their opening move in a game they didn't realize I knew how to play. Diana had orchestrated this moment with precision. She'd waited until after the ceremony, after the formal photographs, after the toasts from friends. She'd chosen the exact moment when the party was at its height, when everyone was relaxed and happy, when the humiliation would be most public and most painful. This wasn't impulse. This was calculated cruelty, planned probably weeks in advance. I wondered how many times she and Vanessa had rehearsed their lines, perfected their delivery, anticipated my breakdown. Around us, the reception was trying to restart itself. The band leader, uncertain what to do, signaled for the musicians to begin playing again. Soft jazz filled the awkward silence. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, but the damage was done. Guests who had congratulated me so warmly just hours ago now avoided eye contact. Some were leaving early, murmuring excuses about babysitters and early morning flights. Others clustered in corners, whispering behind their hands. I could feel their pity and their curiosity, their relief that they weren't the ones being humiliated. My father Arthur stood near the bar, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. He'd said nothing during Diana's announcement, offered no objection, no defense of his daughter. Just stood there with his scotch, staring at his shoes like he always did, when my mother made decisions he didn't have the courage to challenge. I felt a flash of something that wasn't quite anger, more like the tired resignation you feel when someone confirms exactly who you always knew they were. Ethan leaned close to me, his lips nearly touching my ear. To anyone watching, it would look like a tender moment between newlyweds. His voice was low and absolutely steady. "Let them enjoy it. Their downfall starts tonight." Those words landed in my chest like a key turning in a lock. I realized that Ethan had been waiting for this. Maybe not this exact scenario, but something like it. He'd known my family long enough to understand what they were capable of. And unlike me, he'd never harbored any illusions about their capacity for change or redemption. He'd been preparing, thinking ahead, building strategies for a war he knew was inevitable. I squeezed his hand back 3 times. Our private signal. "I'm with you. I trust you. Let's do this." When I stood up from the table, every conversation in the room stuttered to a halt again. I could feel the anticipation, everyone waiting to see if I would finally crack, finally give them the dramatic scene they'd been holding their breath for. Instead, I smoothed down my wedding dress, picked up my champagne glass, and walked calmly toward the dance floor. Ethan followed, taking my hand and pulling me into a slow dance, even though the band was playing up-tempo jazz. They quickly adjusted, shifting into something softer, more romantic. As we swayed together under the string lights, I caught my mother's expression. Confusion. Disappointment. She'd expected tears, not this quiet dignity. "What are you thinking?" Ethan murmured against my hair. "That I've been playing defense my entire life," I said. "And I'm done." For the rest of the evening, I became an actress playing the role of a blissfully happy bride. I smiled until my cheeks ached. I danced with Ethan's college friends and my firm's senior partners. I posed for photographs with distant relatives and business associates, my arm around waists, my expression serene and joyful. When elderly Mrs. Chen from the architecture board complimented my dress, I thanked her warmly and asked about her grandson's college plans. When Ethan's father approached to apologize for the awkwardness, I assured him it was fine, that family dynamics were complicated, that we'd work it out. And through it all, I was cataloging every word, every gesture, every witness to what had happened. When Diana air-kissed my cheek for a photo opportunity, I noted the time, 9:47 p.m. When Vanessa made a joke to a group of her friends about how I'd always been so serious about things, I memorized which 5 people heard it. My mind was working the way it did when I approached a complex design problem, breaking down the structure into components, identifying load-bearing elements, finding the weak points where pressure would cause collapse. I'd been trained to think this way. Architecture isn't just about making buildings look beautiful. It's about understanding forces and stresses, about anticipating how structures will respond to pressure over time. You have to think several steps ahead. Consider every possible point of failure, build in redundancies and safety measures. As I smiled and nodded through conversations with guests who were trying very hard to pretend nothing unusual had happened, I was already sketching the framework of my response in my mind. Vanessa cornered me near the dessert table around 10:30. She was slightly drunk, her words flowing with the false intimacy that champagne brings. "You're being such a good sport about this, Cammy. I knew you'd understand. You've always been the practical one." She squeezed my arm with what probably looked like sisterly affection to anyone watching. "Mom's right, you know. You and Ethan are set for life. I need the help more than you do." I smiled at her, really looked at her face. She believed what she was saying. In her mind, this was justified, reasonable, perhaps even generous on my part to accept it so gracefully. She had no concept of earning anything. No understanding that the house represented more than property value. I'd designed that house. Every window placement, every sustainable material choice, every architectural detail was mine. But to Vanessa, it was just real estate, just another asset to be redistributed according to Diana's calculations of who deserved what. "Of course," I said, my voice sweet. "Family takes care of family." The wedding finally ended around midnight. Guests departed with hugs and congratulations that felt hollow, now tainted by what they'd witnessed. Ethan and I left in a town car, headed to the airport, rice and flower petals still clinging to my hair. We'd planned a week in Napa Valley, a honeymoon close enough that Ethan could handle any urgent business issues, but remote enough to feel like an escape. I'd half expected him to suggest canceling, but when I brought it up in the car, he shook his head. "We're going," he said firmly. "We're not giving them the satisfaction of ruining this too." Our hotel was a converted vineyard estate, all exposed beams and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking acres of grapevines. It should have been romantic. Instead, I spent the first night wide awake while Ethan slept, my mind racing through implications and strategies. At dawn, I gave up on sleep and went to sit on the private terrace with coffee and the leather-bound notebook I'd packed for journaling our honeymoon memories. Ethan found me there 2 hours later, surrounded by pages of notes. He read over my shoulder without comment, then disappeared inside. When he returned, he had his laptop and 2 more cups of coffee. "The house hasn't been legally transferred yet," he said, settling into the chair beside me. "My parents put it in escrow under their names while we finalized wedding plans. The paperwork to transfer it to us wasn't supposed to be filed until next week. Diana's announcement was just words. Legally, nothing has changed." I looked up from my notebook, feeling something shift in my chest. So she has no actual claim to it? None whatsoever. She made a public declaration about something she has no authority over. Ethan pulled up documents on his laptop, showing me the escrow timeline, the property ownership records, the gift documentation from his parents. "This gives us time and leverage." We spent the next 3 days working, not on our honeymoon, but on strategy. Ethan's background in investment meant he understood financial pressure points, legal vulnerabilities, the ways money and property could be used as weapons in family warfare. My architectural training meant I could think systematically about structure and weak points about how to apply pressure precisely where it would do the most damage. I filled the notebook with timelines and documentation. The exact words Diana had used in her announcement, the names of every guest who'd been present, screenshots from social media where people had posted about the incident, copies of the original gift documentation from Ethan's parents. Everything organized, cross-referenced, dated, and verified. Beneath my white wedding dress that night, beneath the performance of gracious acceptance, something fundamental had changed. I wasn't Diana's disappointed daughter anymore, forever hoping for approval that would never come. I wasn't Vanessa's overlooked little sister accepting whatever scraps of recognition fell from the table. I was an architect, and I knew how to build things. But I also knew that before you can build, sometimes you have to demolish what's standing in the way. On our last day in Napa, I closed the notebook and looked at Ethan. "They think they won." He smiled, that cold, calculating expression I'd seen at the reception. "Let them think that. It'll make what comes next so much more satisfying." They thought they'd humiliated me. They just gave me my first blueprint for revenge. Sitting on that terrace in Napa, documenting my mother's betrayal, I kept thinking about the first time she'd done this to me. Not the first time she'd favored Vanessa, that had been happening since I could remember, but the first time she'd actively stolen something that belonged to me and given it to my sister, while making me smile about it. I was 12 years old. The California Young Artist Competition was a big deal, at least in our world. Hundreds of kids submitted entries every year, and winning meant a $5,000 scholarship, a feature in the arts section of the San Francisco Chronicle, and a small bronze plaque with your name on it. I'd spent 3 months on my submission, a detailed architectural rendering of a sustainable community center that incorporated solar panels, rainwater collection, and rooftop gardens. Even at 12, I was obsessed with buildings that could serve both people and the planet. When they announced I'd won first place, I felt something I'd rarely experienced in our house: pure, uncomplicated pride. No caveats, no comparisons, just the simple joy of being recognized for something I'd created. My design teacher, Mrs. Yang, had called our home to share the news, and for once Diana seemed genuinely pleased. She'd even hugged me, told me she was proud, said we'd celebrate at dinner that weekend. Vanessa had been 15, then already beautiful in that effortless way that made adults comment constantly on her looks. She'd entered the competition too, submitting a watercolor of flowers that was pretty, but conventional, the kind of safe decorative art that looked nice on greeting cards. She hadn't placed at all, not even honorable mention, and I remember feeling a little guilty about my own excitement when I saw her disappointed face. The award ceremony was on a Saturday afternoon at the De Young Museum. I wore my best dress, the navy blue one with white piping that I usually saved for holidays. My father drove us all there in our sedan, and I sat in the back, clutching the program that listed my name as first-place winner, ages 10 to 13. I'd read it probably 50 times already, just to make sure it was real. We arrived early, and Diana immediately began networking, introducing herself to other parents and competition organizers. She had a way of inserting herself into conversations, making herself central to any social situation. I stood awkwardly beside Vanessa, who wasn't speaking to anyone, her arms crossed over her chest. Even at 12, I understood she was hurt, but I didn't know how to comfort her without diminishing my own achievement. The ceremony itself was lovely. They called my name, I walked up to accept the plaque and scholarship certificate, and people applauded. The competition director made a small speech about my design's innovation and environmental consciousness. A photographer from the Chronicle took my picture holding the award. For those few minutes, I felt like I mattered, like all the hours I'd spent hunched over my drafting table had been worth something. Then we got home, and Diana called a family meeting in the living room. My father sat in his usual armchair, already looking uncomfortable in that way he had when he sensed conflict coming. Vanessa perched on the sofa, still sulking. I stood there holding my plaque, confused about why we needed to talk when we should be celebrating. Diana's voice was gentle, almost sad when she explained it to me. "Sweetheart, you did wonderfully today. But I need you to understand something about family. Your sister is going through a difficult time right now. She's struggling with her confidence with finding her place. You're so naturally talented at these things, awards come easily to you. But Vanessa needs this more than you do. I remember the exact moment I understood what she was asking. My stomach dropped and my hands tightened on the plaque until the edges bit into my palms. You want me to give her the award? Not give exactly, just let her have her name on it. You'll still know you won. We'll all know. But publicly it would help Vanessa so much to have this recognition. You're strong enough to handle the sacrifice. Your sister is more fragile. I looked at my father, desperate for him to intervene to tell Diana this was insane and unfair. He met my eyes for just a second, and I saw something there, some flicker of disagreement or sympathy. But then he looked away, studying his hands, and said nothing. The silence stretched out until it became its own kind of answer. Vanessa was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Hope, maybe. Or entitlement. Like she already knew how this would end, because it always ended with her getting what she wanted. But it's mine, I said, and my voice sounded small and childish even to my own ears. I worked for 3 months. I earned it. Diana sighed, that particular sound she made when she was disappointed in me for being difficult. Camille, this is about being a good sister. About putting family first. Vanessa knows how to make people love her naturally. You just build things. You'll have plenty of other opportunities for awards, but right now your sister needs this more. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes holding that plaque with my name engraved on it. And then I handed it to Vanessa. Not because I wanted to, not because I thought it was right, but because I was 12 years old and I didn't know how to fight against the combined force of my mother's manipulation and my father's silence. Vanessa took it without saying thank you. Diana called the competition organizers and somehow convinced them to change the records. I never understood exactly what she told them, what excuse she manufactured. But within a week, the Chronicle ran their feature with Vanessa's photo instead of mine. The scholarship check was made out to her. My design was credited to her name. At school, nobody knew the truth except Mrs. Yang, and she looked at me with such pity that I avoided her for the rest of the year. I told my friends I'd decided to withdraw my entry, that I hadn't wanted to compete after all. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth, but it was easier than explaining that my own mother had stolen my achievement and given it to my sister. There was one other memory from around that time, one that surfaced now as I sat reviewing my family's pattern of betrayal. I'd been at my grandfather's house probably around the same age, helping him in his workshop. He'd been a contractor before retiring, and he had all these beautiful old tools that he'd let me use under supervision. I was measuring wood for a birdhouse when I'd asked him out of nowhere, "Why doesn't Mom look like you?" He'd paused in his work and something odd had crossed his face. Then he'd smiled, but it was a complicated smile full of things I was too young to interpret. "Because you look like your grandmother, sweetheart. You have her eyes, her hands, her way of seeing the world." He'd touched my cheek gently. "And your mother, well, your mother is special in her own way." I hadn't understood what he meant then. I'd assumed he was just being cryptic, the way old people sometimes were talking in riddles that made sense only to them. But now, sitting with my revenge notebook, that memory felt significant in a way I couldn't quite grasp. Special in her own way. What had he really meant? Looking back at the award ceremony incident through adult eyes, I understood it differently now. That wasn't love or family loyalty. That was the first time Diana had taught me that what I earned could be taken, that my achievements existed only at her discretion, and that I was expected to smile while being robbed. I realized it wasn't the first time they'd stolen something that was mine. The pattern of theft had started young, but it took Ethan to show me just how deep Diana's manipulation ran. On our 4th day in Napa, after we'd spent hours mapping out legal strategies and documenting evidence, he closed his laptop and said, "There's something I need to tell you. I should have told you before the wedding, but I was afraid it would hurt you too much, and I didn't want that hanging over what should have been a happy time." My stomach tightened. In the 5 years we'd been together, Ethan had never kept secrets from me. Our relationship had been built on brutal honesty from the start, The kind of partnership where we could disagree sharply about solar panel placement or investment timelines and still respect each other completely. We'd met during a pitch meeting when my firm was seeking investors for a sustainable housing development. I'd been 29, passionate about green architecture but naive about business finance. Ethan had been 36, successful enough to be bored by safe investments and intrigued by projects that actually mattered. That first meeting had turned into a 3-hour argument about whether environmental sustainability could coexist with profitable returns. I'd insisted that beauty and ecological responsibility weren't mutually exclusive. He'd challenged every assumption I made about construction costs and market demand. By the end, we were both energized in a way that had nothing to do with the actual business proposal, and everything to do with finding someone who could match your intellectual intensity. Ethan had invested in Ecovision Design, and over the following months, business meetings had turned into coffee conversations, which had turned into dinners where we forgot to talk about architecture at all. He'd fallen in love with the way my mind worked, he told me later, the way I could see a vacant lot and envision not just a building, but an entire ecosystem of human activity and environmental impact. He found my passion for solving real problems infinitely more compelling than the performative charm that characterized so much of his social world. What I loved about Ethan was his refusal to let me settle for less than I deserved. When clients tried to pressure me into compromising my sustainable design principles for cheaper conventional materials, he'd helped me stand firm and find alternative funding. When I doubted whether Ecovision could compete with established firms, he'd shown me the market analysis proving there was real demand for what we offered. He saw my value with clarity I'd never experienced from my own family. Now, sitting across from him in our honeymoon suite with afternoon light slanting through the windows, I could see he was genuinely uncomfortable. Ethan was rarely uncertain about anything, but his hands were fidgeting with his coffee cup in a way that made my heart race. "Just tell me," I said. He pulled out his phone and opened an email folder I'd never seen before, one labeled simply with my mother's initials. 18 months ago, about 6 months before I proposed, your mother contacted me. She asked to meet for lunch, said she wanted to get to know me better to welcome me into the family. He handed me the phone. "Read the follow-up email she sent after that lunch." The message was dated March 15th, almost 2 years ago. Diana's words were polite on the surface, but unmistakably transactional underneath. She'd written that she enjoyed their conversation and appreciated Ethan's interest in her daughter. Then came the paragraph that made my blood turn cold. "However, I feel I must be direct with you about family realities. Camille is a talented architect, but she lacks the social graces necessary for your world. Vanessa, on the other hand, has been raised to navigate high society. She would be a far more suitable partner for someone of your position. I'm prepared to offer you $2 million to end your relationship with Camille and consider courting Vanessa instead. This would be a clean transaction, no hard feelings, simply a recognition that some matches are more appropriate than others." I read it twice, then a third time, unable to process what I was seeing. My mother had tried to buy off my boyfriend. She'd put a price on my relationship, on my happiness, and apparently decided $2 million was fair compensation for Ethan to abandon me and pursue my sister instead. "You never told me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I responded immediately. Ethan scrolled to show me his reply sent within an hour of Diana's message. It was brief and icy. "Diana, I'm not interested in your offer, your money, or your daughter Vanessa. I'm in love with Camille and I intend to marry her. Please don't contact me again with proposals like this." I looked up at him, trying to understand why he'd kept this hidden. "Why didn't you show me this when it happened?" "Because I knew it would hurt you, and I didn't want her poison to touch what we were building together. I thought if I just shut her down firmly enough, that would be the end of it." He took the phone back, his jaw tight. "I was wrong." "What do you mean?" She replied to my rejection. "I saved that too." He pulled up another email, this one much shorter. Diana's response to Ethan's refusal was chilling in its brevity and its promise. "How unfortunate. I had hoped you would be reasonable. Since you've chosen to be difficult, I want you to understand something. Camille has always taken what should have been Vanessa's. I won't allow her to take a future that belongs to my deserving daughter. You've made your choice, Mr. Carter. Now you'll live with the consequences. I'll take everything she loves, starting at her wedding. The words swam in front of my eyes. Starting at her wedding. This had been planned for over a year. The house announcement, the public humiliation, Vanessa's cruel laughter, all of it had been choreographed as revenge for Ethan's refusal to betray me. Diana hadn't just stolen a wedding gift on impulse. She'd been plotting this moment, waiting for the exact opportunity to cause maximum damage, to punish both of us for daring to choose each other over her vision of how our lives should be arranged. She threatened you, I said slowly, and you didn't tell me because you were trying to protect me. I thought I could handle her. I thought if I just married you anyway, proved that her threats were meaningless, she'd eventually back down. Ethan's expression was grim. I underestimated how far she was willing to go. I'm sorry, Camille. I should have warned you what was coming. I sat there holding his phone, looking at evidence of my mother's calculated cruelty, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't family dysfunction or misguided love or even ordinary favoritism. This was a woman who viewed her own daughter as a commodity to be traded away for cash, who'd planned public humiliation as punishment for someone choosing me over her preferred child who'd spent 18 months plotting revenge for the crime of being loved. Your mother tried to buy me off, Ethan said quietly. I said no. She said, then I'll take everything she loves, starting at her wedding. We returned from Napa 2 weeks after the wedding, and I went straight to my office at EcoVision Design. It was a Sunday evening, the building quiet and empty, just the hum of climate control systems and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. I'd told Ethan I needed time alone to think, to process everything we'd discovered. He'd understood immediately, kissing my forehead and telling me he'd be home whenever I was ready. My office overlooked the bay floor-to-ceiling windows that I'd specifically requested when we'd renovated the space 3 years ago. I'd always done my best thinking surrounded by light and view, able to see the city sprawling out below me. Now I stood at those windows for a long moment, watching fog roll in over the water before turning to my drafting table. I pulled out a large sheet of architectural paper, the kind I used for preliminary design sketches, and spread it across the surface. But instead of reaching for my usual tools, the pencils and rulers and templates that shaped buildings, I grabbed a simple black marker. Then I began to draw not structures, but people. Diana went in the center. I drew a box with her name, then started adding connections radiating outward like a spider's web. Her charity board positions 3 of them. Her social connections, the society friends she'd cultivated over decades. Her financial holdings, as much as I knew about them. Arthur branched off to one side, connected but separate, his accounting firm and his golf club memberships and his apparent inability to stand up to his wife. Vanessa occupied another section, her social media presence and her new fake design business, and her network of wealthy friends who valued appearance over substance. Then I added myself to the diagram, but off to the side, connected to them only by thin dotted lines. And next to my box, I drew Ethan, his investment firm, his legal connections, his resources. We were separate from their web, and that separation was our advantage. I stood back and studied the map like I would study a building site survey. Every structure has load-bearing elements, points where all the weight and stress converge. Remove those supports and everything collapses. Diana's load-bearing elements were clear: her reputation, her social standing, her illusion of being the perfect society matriarch. Vanessa's were simpler: her image as successful and glamorous, her ability to coast on borrowed credibility. Beneath the diagram, I wrote 3 words in capital letters: expose, collapse, reclaim. Phase 1 would be exposure, bringing truth into the light. Phase 2 would be the systematic dismantling of their power structure. Phase 3 would be rebuilding something better from the rubble. Just like construction, each phase had to be completed properly before moving to the next. rush the foundation, and the entire building becomes unstable. I spent the next 3 hours filling additional pages with details. Everything I could remember about the wedding announcement written out with precise timestamps. The names of everyone who'd witnessed Diana's declaration. The photographers and videographers who'd been present. I drafted a request to the venue for copies of any security camera footage from the reception. I made notes about which guests had posted on social media and what they'd said. Then I moved to my computer and began the digital work. I created a new cloud storage account under a business name I'd registered years ago for a project that never materialized, Rivers Restoration LLC. It sounded official, legitimate, but was entirely under my control. I started uploading everything: photos from the wedding, screenshots of Vanessa's social media posts about the house, copies of the original gift documentation from Ethan's parents, showing the property was meant for us. I accessed my mother's favorite society newsletter, the one she'd been featured in dozens of times over the years, and downloaded every article mentioning our family. I wanted a complete record of the image she'd built, the persona she'd maintained. Every public statement about family values and supporting your children. The irony would be useful later. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Still working." I sent back a photo of my drafting table covered in papers and diagrams. He replied immediately, "Need anything?" Just the question made me smile. Not pressure to come home, not concern that I was obsessing, just a simple offer of support. I texted back that I was fine, that I'd be home in an hour. Before leaving, I reached out to my firm's attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, who'd handled our business contracts for years. I sent her a carefully worded email asking for a referral to someone who specialized in property law and intellectual property rights, specifically copyright issues related to architectural designs. I kept it vague, professional, just a general inquiry that wouldn't raise questions. Then I contacted 3 different private investigators whose services Ethan had recommended, firms that specialized in financial research and background checks. I didn't hire them yet, just introduced myself and asked about their capabilities and rates. I wanted options ready when I needed them. The key to all of this, I kept reminding myself, was patience and precision. Diana had spent 18 months planning her revenge. I could take as much time as necessary to plan mine. The difference was that her plan had been rooted in cruelty and ego. Mine would be rooted in truth and justice, built on a foundation that could withstand scrutiny. I thought about all the buildings I'd designed over the years, how each one started with questions. What is this structure meant to do? Who will use it? What forces will it need to withstand? I asked those same questions now about my revenge plan. What was it meant to accomplish? Not just hurting Diana and Vanessa, though I won't pretend that wasn't part of it. But more than that, it was about reclaiming what had been taken, about ensuring they couldn't do this to anyone else, about breaking a pattern of manipulation that had defined my entire life. Who would be affected? Everyone in that web of connections I'd drawn. Some would be collateral damage, people who'd simply been in Diana's orbit without understanding her true nature. I'd need to be careful about that, surgical in my approach. What forces would my plan need to withstand legal challenges? Certainly. Social pressure, manipulation, guilt trips about family loyalty. Diana's ability to spin narratives and control public perception. Arthur's passive resistance and appeals to my sympathy. Vanessa's victim playing and tears. I rolled up the diagrams and locked them in my office safe, then cleared my computer history and logged out of the cloud storage. No point in being careless. Before turning off the lights, I took one last look at the city below, all those buildings standing solid against the fog and wind, because someone had designed them properly, had thought through every structural element and stress point. Revenge was just another form of architecture, and I was about to design perfection. A month after the wedding, I was in a client meeting when my phone started buzzing with notifications. I ignored them at first, focused on presenting sustainable building concepts to a tech startup looking to construct a new headquarters. But during a break, I glanced at the screen and saw that 15 people had tagged me in the same Instagram post. My stomach dropped before I even opened the app. Vanessa's feed had exploded with new content. The first image showed her reclining on the custom window seat I'd designed for the beachfront house, the one with built-in storage and cushions in organic cotton. The photo was professionally lit, probably shot by one of the lifestyle photographers she'd cultivated through her influencer connections. She wore white linen and held a coffee cup, her hair cascading over her shoulders, looking like she belonged in an architecture magazine spread. The caption made my hands shake. Finally settled into my new design studio. This window nook is my favorite thinking space. Natural light is essential for creativity. As an architect, I believe every space should tell a story. She'd used hashtags like architecture sustainable design, modern, architect green building and design life. At the bottom, she'd added a location tag, Vanessa Rivers Designs. I scrolled through the rest of her posts from that morning. 11 photos total, each one showcasing a different area of the house. The kitchen with its reclaimed wood countertops and energy-efficient appliances. The living room with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the ocean. The home office I'd designed with built-in bookshelves made from salvaged timber. Every single space was my work, my vision, my countless hours of planning and detail refinement. But Vanessa's captions told a different story. Designed this kitchen with functionality and beauty in mind. The secret to good architecture is understanding how people move through space. Sustainable materials don't have to sacrifice style. She was writing as if she'd created these spaces, as if the innovative design choices were hers, as if she had any understanding of load-bearing walls or passive solar orientation, or any of the technical knowledge that actually went into creating what she was photographing. The comments were even worse. Friends and strangers alike praising her talent, asking if she took clients, congratulating her on her beautiful work. A few people who knew me had tagged me in the posts, clearly confused, but Vanessa wasn't acknowledging those tags. She was simply accepting the praise as if it belonged to her. I clicked through to her profile and felt rage rise in my throat like bile. She'd changed her bio. It now read Vanessa Rivers, architect and designer, creating spaces that inspire, DM for consultations. She'd added a link to a brand new website, vanessariversdesigns.com. I opened the website on my laptop, my client meeting completely forgotten. The homepage featured a large photo of Vanessa in front of the beach house with text overlaid, award-winning sustainable architecture with timeless elegance. Award-winning. The only architectural awards in our family belonged to me. The portfolio section displayed photos of the beach house from every angle, each one captioned with design philosophy that sounded like she'd copied it from my firm's website and made it slightly more vapid. Most damaging was the About section. Vanessa Rivers comes from a prestigious family of architects and has spent years honing her craft in sustainable design. Her work has been featured in prominent California publications, and she brings both artistic vision and technical expertise to every project. It was all technically lies or stolen valor. The prestigious family of architects was me. The features in publications had been about my projects. The expertise was mine. She'd even created a contact form for potential clients. I clicked through her Instagram followers and recognized several names, wealthy women from Diana's social circle people, with money to spend on home renovations and vacation properties, exactly the kind of clients who would pay premium prices based on reputation and social connections rather than actual skill. My assistant knocked on the conference room door, reminding me that my clients were waiting. I apologized and returned to the meeting, but my mind was elsewhere, already cataloging what I was seeing, understanding the full scope of what Vanessa was attempting. She wasn't just taking the house. She was stealing my entire professional identity using the Rivers name that I'd built credibility around for nearly a decade, positioning herself as an architect when she had exactly zero training or qualification. That evening, I sat down with my laptop and began systematic documentation. I took screenshots of every post, every caption, every hashtag. I saved the HTML code of her website using archive tools that would preserve it exactly as it appeared on that date. I documented every claim she'd made about her qualifications and cross-referenced them with reality. I downloaded the photos she'd posted and noted that several of them included architectural drawings, visible in the background drawings that had my signature in the corner, if you looked closely enough. I reached out to Patricia Chen's referral, an intellectual property attorney named Marcus Webb, who specialized in copyright and trademark issues. In my email, I explained the situation clinically without emotion. A family member was claiming authorship of my copyrighted architectural work and using my professional surname to establish a competing business in the same industry. I attached examples of Vanessa's posts alongside my original design documents, which were dated and registered with the U.S. Copyright Office. Marcus responded within hours, his email brief and direct. "This is textbook infringement on multiple fronts. We should talk immediately." I also contacted a trademark attorney about protecting the river's name in architectural and design services. I discovered that while Vanessa had registered her business name with the state, she hadn't filed for trademark protection. I could potentially challenge her right to use River's designs at all, given that I'd been operating professionally under that surname for years and had established clear brand recognition in the industry. Every night for a week, I monitored her accounts. Vanessa posted daily, sometimes multiple times a day. She started doing Instagram stories showing herself sketching, though I could tell from the drawings that she had no idea what she was doing. The proportions were wrong, the perspective was amateur, the technical details were nonsensical, but her followers didn't know that. They just saw an attractive woman in a beautiful space claiming expertise they had no reason to doubt. She accepted her first client on day 9, a woman from Marin County who wanted to renovate her kitchen. Vanessa posted about it excitedly. "So thrilled to be working with my first official client, sustainable kitchen design coming soon." I wondered what would happen when that client discovered Vanessa couldn't actually read a blueprint, or specify proper materials, or coordinate with contractors, or do any of the thousands of technical things that real architectural work required. I saved that post too, added it to my growing file of evidence. Every screenshot was timestamped, backed up to 3 different cloud services, and organized chronologically. I was building a case the way I built buildings, with careful attention to foundation, with every element documented and verified with clear structural integrity that could withstand challenge. My anger had transformed into something colder and more focused. Vanessa thought she could simply take my reputation, wear it like one of her designer dresses, and that I would do nothing. She'd underestimated me her entire life, dismissed my work as less valuable than her charm. Now she was about to learn what happened when you stole from someone who understood the law as well as she understood architecture. She wanted recognition. She was about to get it in court. What Vanessa didn't know, what Diana didn't know, what nobody in my family had ever bothered to learn about my work, was that I'd been protecting my intellectual property for years. The beach house wasn't just a building. It was the first complete architectural design I'd ever registered with the United States Copyright Office, filed under Title 17, Section 102 of the U.S. Code. Back when I was 28 years old and paranoid about larger firms stealing my innovative, sustainable design concepts, I'd registered everything, not just the overall building plans, but the detailed interior elevations, the custom lighting system I'd designed that used motion sensors and natural light optimization, the built-in furniture pieces that were integral to the structure, even the specific arrangement of windows that maximized passive solar heating while minimizing summer heat gain. Every technical drawing had my signature in the lower right corner, dated and witnessed. The copyright registration certificate sat in my office, safe, official, and unambiguous. More than that, I had the paper trail that proved authorship beyond any doubt. The original building permits listed me as the architect of record. The contractor agreements from 6 years ago, when Ethan's parents had first commissioned the design, showed my firm as the responsible party. I had emails discussing design choices, hand sketches, showing the evolution of ideas, material specification sheets, with my notes scribbled in the margins. I even had photographs of myself at the construction site wearing a hard hat, reviewing framing work with the builder. When I met with Marcus Webb in his downtown office, I brought 3 binders of documentation. He'd spent 2 hours reviewing everything, occasionally making notes or asking clarification questions about technical details. Finally, he'd looked up at me with something like admiration in his expression. "This is airtight," he'd said. "Your sister isn't just claiming to own a house you designed. She's publicly claiming authorship of a registered copyrighted work and using that false claim to establish a commercial enterprise. That's violation of Section 106, subsection 2, which protects your right to be identified as the author and to control derivative commercial uses of your creative work." "Can we stop her?" I'd asked, though I already knew the answer. "We can do better than stop her. We can make this hurt." Marcus had pulled out a legal pad and started sketching the framework of a cease and desist letter. "The key is that she's not just violating your copyright in private. She's doing it publicly, repeatedly, and for commercial gain. Every Instagram post, every client consultation, every time she claims to be the designer, she's digging herself deeper into liability." We'd spent another hour crafting the strategy. The letter wouldn't come from me personally, and it wouldn't come from a lawyer obviously connected to me. Instead, it would come from Rivers Restoration LLC, the shell company I'd registered years ago. Marcus explained that this approach served multiple purposes. It would confuse and frighten my family, make them think some unknown corporate entity had legal claims they didn't understand, and keep me separated from the initial action so I could watch how they responded without them suspecting my involvement. The letter Marcus drafted was 12 pages long, dense with legal citations and attached exhibits. It opened with a formal identification of Rivers Restoration LLC as the entity managing intellectual property rights for certain architectural works. It then detailed with exhaustive specificity every instance where Vanessa had violated copyright protections, 16 Instagram posts, 8 Facebook updates, the entire Vanessa Rivers Designs website, and even a consultation agreement she'd posted a photo of that described her as principal architect. The legal language was deliberately intimidating. Words like willful infringement, statutory damages, commercial exploitation, and litigation. Marcus had included screenshots of Vanessa's posts with my original copyrighted designs displayed side by side, the similarity so obvious that even a layperson could see she was claiming credit for work that wasn't hers. He'd attached copies of my copyright registration building permits and contractor agreements, creating an overwhelming wall of evidence. The demands were clear and non-negotiable. Vanessa must immediately cease claiming authorship or design credit for the property. She must remove all social media content suggesting she designed the space. She must shut down Vanessa Rivers Designs, or at minimum remove any references to architectural work. She must contact any clients she'd agreed to work with and inform them she was not in fact a licensed architect. And she had 14 days to comply before Rivers Restoration LLC would file a formal lawsuit seeking statutory damages, which Marcus noted could reach up to $150,000 per willful infringement. "Will she comply?" I'd asked Marcus as we finalized the letter. "Most people do when they realize they're legally exposed. But from what you've told me about your sister, she might be arrogant enough to ignore it. Which would actually be better for us because then we file suit and discovery gets very interesting." The letter went out on a Tuesday morning via certified mail requiring signature confirmation. I'd arranged for copies to be sent to both Vanessa's apartment and my parents' house, knowing that Diana would be pulled into this immediately. Marcus also sent a courtesy copy to Vanessa's business email address, the one listed on her website contact page. I tracked the delivery notifications obsessively. The package to my parents' house was signed for at 11:30 a.m. by someone whose signature was illegible on the electronic confirmation. The one to Vanessa's apartment arrived at 2:15 p.m., signed by Vanessa herself. Then I waited. I didn't call them, didn't text, didn't reach out in any way. I simply went about my normal work routine, meeting with clients and reviewing project specifications, while my phone sat on my desk like a bomb waiting to detonate. The first call came at 4:45 p.m. My mother, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message, just called again immediately. I declined that one too. Then came a text. "Camille, we need to talk about this legal situation with Vanessa. Please call me immediately." I deleted the text without responding. Vanessa called 20 minutes later, and this time I did answer, putting the phone on speaker so Ethan could hear. He'd come home early, sensing that today would be interesting. "What the hell is this?" Vanessa's voice was shrill, frightened. "Some company is threatening to sue me for $150,000. They're saying I stole architectural designs. This is insane, Camille. You have to help me figure out what's going on." I kept my voice perfectly calm, almost bored. "What company?" "Rivers Restoration something. They sent this massive legal letter saying I violated copyrights. I don't even understand what they're talking about. Can you look at it? You know about this legal stuff." "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." I said each word carefully measured. "What exactly are they claiming you did?" "They're saying I claimed credit for designing a house that someone else designed. It's completely ridiculous. I've been posting about my new place, that's all. How is that illegal?" "Well," I said slowly, "if the house was designed by someone else and you're publicly claiming you designed it, that could potentially be a problem, especially if you're using those claims to get clients." "But it's my house now. Mom said so at your wedding." Legal ownership and design authorship are two different things, Vanessa. Did you actually design that house? There was a long pause. "I mean, I've been living in it, styling it." "That's not the same as being the architect of record. Do you have any documentation showing you created the architectural plans?" Another pause, longer this time. Then, in a smaller voice, "No." The cease and desist letter arrived, addressed to my sister, signed by a company I'd created just for this moment. After I hung up with Vanessa, I waited exactly 23 minutes before my mother called again. This time I answered, putting her on speaker so Ethan could witness what was about to unfold. "Camille, thank God. Vanessa is hysterical. She got some insane legal letter, and she's convinced she's going to be sued for $150,000. You need to tell us what's happening." Diana's voice had that edge it always got when she was trying to control a situation that was slipping away from her. "I don't know any more than you do, Mom. Vanessa said something about a company claiming copyright infringement." "Yes, Rivers Restoration or some nonsense. Have you ever heard of them?" The suspicion in her voice was almost palpable, but not quite directed at me yet. She was still in problem-solving mode, trying to identify the enemy. "No, never. But if they're claiming Vanessa violated copyright on architectural work, there must be some basis for it. Copyright law is pretty straightforward." "This is those Carters." Diana's voice turned sharp and certain. "Ethan's family is doing this. They're angry about the house situation, and they're trying to punish us through some corporate entity. This is harassment, and we're going to fight it." I let the accusation hang in the air for a moment before responding. "Mom, Ethan's parents don't care about the house. They gave it as a gift. Why would they suddenly sue Vanessa? Because you probably complained to them, you probably told them we were unfair, and now they're retaliating. This is what happens when you marry into a family that uses money as a weapon." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting me handle this. "I haven't said anything to Ethan's parents about the wedding." I said, which was technically true. They'd reached out to me after seeing the social media posts about the incident, horrified and apologetic. But I'd been the one reassuring them, not the other way around. Maybe you should focus less on blaming people and more on understanding what Vanessa actually did. What she did? She posted photos of her own home. Since when is that a crime? When you claim you designed something you didn't design and use that claim to get paying clients, it's not just a crime, it's fraud and copyright infringement. I kept my voice educational, almost helpful. Did Vanessa tell you she's been calling herself an architect, that she's accepting client consultations? There was a pause. She's building a business. There's nothing wrong with that. There is if the business is built on stolen credentials and false claims of expertise. Mom, did you tell her to do this, to use the house to launch a design business? I told her to take advantage of opportunities. She finally has something beautiful to showcase. Why shouldn't she build on that? Through the phone, I heard Vanessa's voice in the background, sharp and accusatory. You said nobody would care. You said I should establish myself before anyone questioned it. Then Diana's muffled response, clearly trying to cover the phone but not quite successfully, "Lower your voice, this is not the time." But Vanessa wasn't lowering her voice. In fact, she seemed to be getting louder, closer to the phone. "This is completely your fault. You're the one who said I should market myself as a designer, that the river's name meant something in architecture because of Camille's work, that I should ride that credibility." "Vanessa, stop it." Diana's voice was steel now. "No, I'm the one being sued. I'm the one whose name is on this letter. You told me this was foolproof, that Camille wouldn't care because she has Ethan's money that nobody would check." I heard a crash in the background, like something being knocked over, then my father's voice for the first time. "Enough. Both of you, enough." The phone went quiet. I'd never heard Arthur Rivers yell, not once in 34 years. His voice had always been soft, conciliatory, the peacekeeper who smoothed over Diana's sharp edges with gentle suggestions that she always ignored. "Arthur, this is none of your concern." Diana's voice was clipped, dismissive. "Go back to your office." "None of my concern." My father's voice cracked with something that sounded like decades of suppressed frustration finally breaking through. "You've turned this family into a circus. You humiliated Camille at her own wedding. You pushed Vanessa into committing fraud. And now you're trying to blame everyone except yourself for the consequences. How dare you? I told you not to do it." Arthur's shout cut through Diana's protest. "I told you that announcing the house transfer at the wedding was cruel and wrong. I told you that encouraging Vanessa to pretend to be an architect would backfire. But you never listened to me, Diana. You never have." The silence that followed was deafening. I imagined my mother's face, the shock of being contradicted so publicly, even if the only witness was Vanessa. "You knew." Vanessa's voice was small now, wounded. "Dad, you knew Mom planned the wedding announcement. She told me 3 weeks before the ceremony. Said it would teach Camille not to think she was better than the family, that it would remind her where she came from. I said it would destroy our relationship with our daughter. She said I was being dramatic. And you said nothing." The accusation in Vanessa's voice was raw. "You let her do it anyway." "Yes." Arthur's voice dropped to something quieter, ashamed. "I let her do it. Just like I've let her do everything for 40 years. Just like I stood by while she made you compete with each other, while she twisted every achievement into a comparison, while she built this family on favoritism and manipulation. I'm a coward, Vanessa, but at least I know it." Diana's voice, when it came, was venomous. "If you're quite finished with your performance, Arthur, we have an actual crisis to manage. Camille, are you still there?" "I'm here." "We need your help. You understand copyright law, you know architects. Tell us how to make this go away." The audacity was almost impressive. After everything, she still thought she could command my assistance, still believed that family obligation would override reason and self-respect. "I can't help you, Mom. If Vanessa claimed credit for copyrighted work that wasn't hers, that's a legal problem only she can solve. She needs to hire an attorney who specializes in intellectual property law and hope they can negotiate a settlement before this goes to court." "You're really going to just abandon your sister when she needs you? The way you abandoned me at my wedding. The way you abandoned every principle of honesty by encouraging Vanessa to commit fraud. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just refusing to fix a problem you created." I heard Vanessa crying, now loud sobs that sounded almost childlike. Diana was saying something to her in a harsh whisper. Arthur was silent, probably retreating back into the passive observer role that had defined his entire marriage. "We'll handle this ourselves," Diana said finally, her voice cold. "But don't think this is over, Camille. Family doesn't just disappear because of some legal technicality." "You're right," I said softly. "Family doesn't disappear, but trust does, and you destroyed that the moment you planned to humiliate me in public." I hung up before she could respond. Ethan was looking at me with something like concern, but also admiration. "Are you okay?" he asked. I thought about the question. Was I okay? I'd just listened to my family tear each other apart over consequences they'd brought on themselves. My father had finally admitted to decades of cowardice. My sister was panicking over legal threats she deserved. My mother was scrambling to control a situation she'd created through her own cruelty. "I'm fine," I said. And I meant it. They were tearing each other apart, and I hadn't even started yet. 4 weeks after the phone call where my family had imploded, I sent a group text to my parents and Vanessa. "I think we should talk in person. Can we all meet for dinner next Friday? My treat. Let's try to move forward as a family." I chose my words carefully, keeping the tone conciliatory without actually apologizing for anything. Diana responded within minutes. "Finally, yes. We'll be there." Vanessa's reply came an hour later, a single word, "Okay." My father simply sent a thumbs-up emoji. I made reservations at Mercer House, an upscale restaurant in Pacific Heights, known for its private dining rooms and impeccable service. The kind of place where Diana would feel comfortable, where the setting itself would signal that this was meant to be a civilized, sophisticated gathering. I requested the smallest private room, explaining to the hostess that we were having a sensitive family discussion and needed complete privacy. The night of the dinner, Ethan and I arrived 15 minutes early. I'd dressed carefully, choosing a silk blouse and tailored pants that looked elegant, but not celebratory. Ethan wore a suit, his expression neutral, but his eyes alert. We waited in the private dining room, a space with dark wood paneling and soft lighting, a round table set for 5, with crisp white linens and crystal stemware. My family arrived together, which surprised me slightly. Diana wore a champagne-colored dress and pearls, her hair perfect, her makeup flawless. She was dressed for reconciliation, for photos that might be taken for the performance of family healing. Vanessa looked nervous, her smile tentative, wearing a simple black dress that seemed deliberately understated. Arthur trailed behind them both, his shoulders slightly hunched, looking older than I remembered. Diana embraced me the moment she entered, a gesture that felt performative, even as I registered the expensive perfume she wore. "Darling, I'm so glad you reached out. This rift has been terrible for everyone." She'd brought a gift, a medium-sized package wrapped in silver paper with an elaborate bow. "I had this framed for you, from the wedding. I thought you might want it despite everything that happened." I took the package but didn't open it, simply set it aside on the console table near the door. "Thank you. Let's sit." We settled around the table, the server appearing immediately to take drink orders and explain the evening's menu. Diana ordered wine with the confidence of someone who believed the hard part was over, that showing up was the same as making amends. Vanessa asked for water, her fingers fidgeting with her napkin. Arthur ordered Scotch neat. The first course arrived, an elegant salad with microgreens and edible flowers. Diana launched into her prepared speech almost immediately, her voice warm and maternal. "Family is everything, really. We've all made mistakes, said things in anger, let misunderstandings grow into something bigger than they should have been. But at the end of the day, we're blood. We have to be able to forgive each other and move forward." Vanessa nodded along, looking relieved. "I've missed you, Cammy. Things got so confused with the legal letter and everything. I never meant to hurt you." I let them talk, nodding occasionally, keeping my expression open and receptive. I asked Arthur about his golf game. I complimented Diana's dress. I played the role they expected, the daughter who was ready to fold, to forgive, to let everything return to the dysfunctional normal we'd maintained for decades. The main course was served perfectly cooked sea bass with seasonal vegetables. As the server refilled wine glasses and retreated, I reached into my handbag and pulled out 3 cream-colored envelopes, each one sealed with a wax stamp. I'd chosen expensive stationery, the kind Diana herself might use for formal correspondence. "Before we talk about moving forward, I wanted to give each of you something," I said, placing an envelope in front of my mother, my sister, and my father. "I think clarity is important for rebuilding trust." Diana smiled clearly, believing these were some kind of peace offering, perhaps letters I'd written expressing my feelings, or maybe even legal documents dropping the copyright claim against Vanessa. She opened hers with delicate fingers, maintaining her gracious expression as she unfolded the papers inside. I watched the exact moment comprehension hit. The smile froze on her face. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second, then flipped back to the first as if she'd misread. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her makeup suddenly garish against pale skin. Vanessa had opened hers too. Inside was a complete timeline of her social media posts claiming authorship of my architectural work, printed screenshots with dates and engagement metrics, copies of her business registration for Vanessa Rivers Designs, and the consultation agreement she'd signed with her first client that explicitly identified her as a licensed architect, which she was not. Arthur's envelope contained something different. Copies of documents he'd signed as witness or co-signer on various family financial transactions, including property transfers and tax filings that Diana had orchestrated. Nothing illegal on his part, but proof that he'd known about and enabled Diana's manipulations for years. Diana's envelope held the most damaging contents. Screenshots of her email to Ethan offering $2 million to leave me. Copies of texts she'd sent to Vanessa in the weeks before my wedding, explicitly planning the house announcement with phrases like, "It will put her in her place," and "She needs to remember she's not special just because she married money." And a detailed accounting of how she'd used my professional reputation to advance Vanessa's fake career, including forwarded emails where she'd described Vanessa to potential clients as from the prestigious Rivers architectural family. The silence at the table was absolute. The only sound was the clink of silverware from the main dining room beyond our closed door, muted conversations and laughter from people having normal dinners. Diana's hands were shaking as she set the papers down. She looked at me with something I'd never seen in her eyes before: fear. Not anger, not indignation, but genuine fear of what I might do with this information. Vanessa had tears running down her face, smudging her mascara. She wasn't sobbing, just silently crying as she stared at the evidence of her own fraud printed in black and white. Arthur hadn't even finished reading his envelope. He'd gotten through the first few pages and simply stopped, his face gray, his scotch forgotten. Ethan stood slowly picking up his wine glass. Every eye turned to him. He smiled, but it was the coldest expression I'd ever seen on his face, the look of someone who'd been patient and strategic and was now watching his carefully laid plans come to fruition. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the small room. "To family, and how fragile trust can be when built on lies." He raised his glass. No one else moved. Diana's hand went to her throat, touching her pearls like a talisman that might protect her. Vanessa's shoulders were shaking now. Arthur finally looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw the recognition that this dinner was never about reconciliation. Other diners in the restaurant couldn't see us through the closed door, but they could probably sense the tension radiating from our private room, the way animals sense an approaching storm. I stood as well, smoothing my napkin and setting it beside my untouched main course. "I think we're done here," I said quietly. "The servers can box everything up. You should all take time to review those documents carefully, and maybe consult with attorneys about what they mean for your respective legal situations." Diana found her voice, though it came out strangled. "You're blackmailing us." "No," I said. "I'm showing you that I know exactly what you've done. What you do with that information is up to you. But I wanted you to understand something. I'm not the child you can steal from anymore. I'm not the daughter who will smile while you take what's mine. Those days are over." I picked up my handbag. Ethan put his hand on the small of my back, a gesture of support and solidarity. As we walked toward the door, I paused next to the wrapped gift Diana had brought. I picked it up and handed it back to her. "I don't need photos from that day," I said. "I remember it perfectly." And that was just the appetizer. The dinner at Mercer House had been 3 days ago, and none of them had contacted me since. I imagined them holed up somewhere consulting lawyers trying to figure out how to contain the damage I'd documented so carefully. I was reviewing project proposals at home when Ethan came into my office, his face serious in a way that immediately put me on alert. "We have a problem," he said, closing the door behind him, even though we were alone in the house. "Actually, you have a problem. A significant one. He set his laptop on my desk and turned it to face me. On the screen was a document from his forensic accountant, a woman named Sarah Chen, who Ethan employed to review complex financial transactions before major investments. Sarah had been helping us prepare for the potential lawsuit against Vanessa, tracking down financial records and building a comprehensive picture of my family's business dealings. Sarah was cross-referencing your family's corporate history when she found something in the 2018 records for Rivers Commercial Properties, Ethan said. That was your grandfather's company, right? The one he started in the 70s. Yes, commercial real estate development. He sold it before he died, I thought. Used the proceeds to fund his retirement and some charitable trusts. He didn't sell it. According to these records, shares were transferred in June 2018 to a corporation called Ashford Holdings. The transfer documents include signatures from the major shareholders, which at that time were your grandfather's estate, meaning your mother as executor and you. I felt ice settle in my stomach. Me, I never signed anything about that company. I was 27 in 2018, barely out of graduate school and focused on getting my firm off the ground. I didn't even know I owned shares. Ethan pulled up another document. According to your grandfather's will, which was probated in 2016, you inherited 30% of Rivers Commercial Properties. Your mother got 40% as the primary heir, and the remaining 30% was divided among various cousins and charitable entities. But in 2018, all the major shares were transferred to Ashford Holdings, in what's documented as a negotiated sale. He showed me the signature page. There it was, my name in flowing script, supposedly my signature authorizing the transfer of assets worth, according to the valuation documents, approximately $800,000. I stared at it, feeling violated in a way that went beyond anything my mother had done at the wedding. That's not my signature, I said. I know. I pulled your signature from our marriage license from tax returns you filed in 2018 from your architectural license registration. They don't match. He overlaid the images on screen, and the differences were obvious once you looked closely. The forged signature had flourishes I'd never used. The capital C in Camille was formed differently. The overall slant was wrong. How did she even do this? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Sarah had anticipated my question. The next document was an email chain from 2018 showing correspondence about the stock transfer sent to an old Gmail address I'd created in college and abandoned after graduation. I'd switched to a professional email once I started my firm, and that college address had sat dormant for years, accumulating spam and notifications I never saw. Diana had used that dead email to conduct the entire transaction, forging my signature and ensuring I'd never be notified of what was being done in my name. The lawyer handling the transfer had sent all documents to that address, received replies that appeared to come from me but were actually from Diana using my account, and processed everything without ever speaking to me directly. There's more, Ethan said grimly. Sarah dug into Ashford Holdings. It's a private investment company registered in Delaware. The principal owner is a man named Marcus Ashford. The name meant nothing to me, but Ethan's expression suggested it should. Who is he? I had Sarah run a background check. Marcus Ashford is 68 years old, made his fortune in commercial real estate in the 80s and 90s. And according to some very old Society page articles, Sarah found he and your mother were engaged in 1984. The engagement broke off under unclear circumstances, but there are hints in the coverage that it was acrimonious. My mind raced through the implications. Mom sold Grandpa's company to her ex-fiancé, the one who presumably hurt her badly enough that it's still affecting her 30 years later. It appears so. And she forged your signature to do it, which means if this ever comes under legal scrutiny, your name is attached to a potentially fraudulent transaction. She didn't just steal your inheritance, she made you legally liable for the theft. I sat back in my chair, processing this new layer of betrayal. My mother hadn't just taken what was mine. She'd used my identity as a shield, ensuring that if anyone investigated the suspicious transfer of a profitable company to her ex-lover at below market value, my signature would be on the documents. I was the patsy, the fall guy insurance against her own legal exposure. "What's my liability here?" I asked, forcing myself to think practically rather than emotionally. "Potentially serious. If the other shareholders ever challenge the transfer, if tax authorities question the valuation, if Marcus Ashford turns out to be involved in anything criminal and his assets get investigated. Your name is in those documents. You could be questioned, potentially charged, depending on what they find, even though you had nothing to do with it." "Can we prove I didn't sign these?" "Handwriting analysis would be definitive, but that requires legal proceedings. The bigger problem is that the statute of limitations for fraud claims varies depending on when the fraud was discovered. We discovered it now, which gives us grounds to act, but it also means we need to be strategic about how we handle this." Ethan pulled up another document, this one prepared by his attorney. "My recommendation is that you immediately transfer all your personal assets into an individual trust completely separate from any family holdings or joint accounts. You need to establish clear legal separation between your finances and anything Diana touches. Then we need to decide whether to report the forgery to authorities or use it as leverage." I thought about the dinner at Mercer House, about handing my family those envelopes full of evidence. I'd thought that was the full extent of my mother's betrayal, the complete picture of her manipulation. But I'd been wrong. The wedding humiliation was petty cruelty. The encouragement of Vanessa's fraud was enabling bad behavior. But this was something darker. This was Diana using her own daughter as a legal shield while selling her father's legacy to a man who'd apparently broken her heart decades ago. Why would she sell to him? I asked. If he hurt her, why give him something Grandpa built? I don't know. Maybe it was the best offer. Maybe it was some kind of twisted closure proving she could profit from him after he damaged her. Maybe she thought he owed her something and this was how she collected. Sarah's still investigating the full story. I stood and walked to the window looking out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, my mother was probably sleeping soundly, convinced that the worst of her secrets were contained in those envelopes I'd given her at dinner. She had no idea I'd just discovered something that could destroy her completely. Something that proved she'd committed fraud using my identity, potentially exposing me to legal consequences for crimes I didn't commit. The rage I felt was different from what I'd experienced at the wedding. That had been hot and immediate, the shock of public humiliation. This was cold and calculating, the fury of someone who'd finally seen the complete blueprint of how they'd been used and discarded by someone who was supposed to protect them. Set up the trust, I told Ethan. Separate everything, and have Sarah keep digging into the Ashford Holdings deal. I want to know every detail, every communication, every dollar that changed hands. What are you thinking? I turned from the window to face him. That mom built her entire life on lies and manipulation. She used me as collateral, as a shield, as a tool to be exploited whenever it suited her purposes. She forged my signature to sell something that belonged to me so she could profit from it. And Mom had used my name for her lies, now I'd use her lies to end her empire. The discovery of the forged stock transfer changed everything. What had started as personal revenge for wedding humiliation had evolved into something larger, more systematic. I needed to see the complete picture to understand every connection and vulnerability in the structure my mother had built over decades. So I returned to what I knew best, architectural planning. I cleared my largest drafting table and spread out a sheet of paper 4 feet wide. This time I used colored markers to create a comprehensive map of power, influence, and weakness. Diana's name went in the center, drawn inside a bold circle. From that center point, I drew lines connecting to everything she controlled or influenced. Her charity board positions branched off to the right: the San Francisco Arts Council, the Women's Business Alliance, the Heritage Preservation Society. Each one represented social capital connections to wealthy donors and the veneer of respectability she'd cultivated so carefully. I noted the names of other board members, many of whom I recognized from my wedding people, who valued reputation above all else. To the left, I mapped her financial holdings. The proceeds from the sale of Rivers Commercial Properties investment accounts the house she and Arthur owned in Pacific Heights, a vacation property in Napa. Ethan sat beside me, pulling up financial records on his laptop and feeding me information as I documented the web of assets. Below Diana's circle, I drew Vanessa connected by a thick line labeled manipulation and dependence. From Vanessa, I traced her fake design business, her social media following her wealthy friends who might become clients. Each connection was a potential point of pressure, a relationship that could be disrupted if the truth about her fraud became public. Arthur appeared off to the side, drawn with dotted lines to show his peripheral status. His accounting firm, his golf club, his passive complicity in everything Diana had orchestrated. He was a supporting structure that had already shown cracks during our last phone call, and cracked supports could be exploited. Then I added myself and Ethan deliberately positioned outside the main web. Our resources, our legal team, our evidence files, our legitimate businesses. We were separate from their structure, which meant we could apply pressure from the outside without being caught in the collapse. Ethan studied the diagram, his finger tracing the connections. "The charity boards are the key," he said. "Diana's entire social identity is built on being seen as philanthropic and cultured. If those organizations distance themselves from her, everything else falls apart. Her friends will follow the board's lead. Her social invitations will dry up. She becomes radioactive. So we need to give the boards a reason to ask her to step down," I said. "We need to make staying associated with her more damaging than cutting ties. Which means controlled information release just enough to create doubt and concern, but not so much that it looks like a targeted attack." I reached out to a PR consultant Ethan had worked with before, a woman named Jennifer Park, who specialized in what she carefully called reputation management and strategic communications. When I met with her at her minimalist office in Soma, I laid out the situation without naming names initially. A prominent socialite who had committed fraud, encouraged family members to break the law, and built her public image on deception. Jennifer listened carefully, taking notes on a tablet. "You want to damage her reputation without being directly connected to the damage," she said. It wasn't a question. "I want the truth to come out in a way that seems organic, like concerned parties noticing irregularities, rather than a vendetta." Anonymous tips to journalists who cover society news and business ethics. Carefully worded observations about potential improprieties. No accusations, just questions that lead reporters to investigate on their own. Jennifer looked up from her tablet. "It's a slow burn, but it's effective. Once one outlet runs a story, others follow. The subject can't fight back effectively because there's no clear antagonist, just a growing narrative." We crafted the first tip, carefully sending it to a business reporter at the San Francisco Business Journal, who had previously covered nonprofit governance issues. The message was brief and factual. A prominent San Francisco socialite currently serving on multiple charity boards may be involved in property fraud and intellectual property theft. Her daughter has been falsely claiming architectural credentials and accepting paying clients under false pretenses. Worth investigating how this reflects on the organizations that have given her positions of trust. No names, no specific accusations, just enough to make a reporter curious. The second phase of my plan required more direct action. I'd learned through Sarah's investigation that 6 years ago, Diana had used her influence to get a small architecture firm called Brennan Associates cut out of a lucrative city contract. The firm's owner, Michael Brennan, had underbid Diana's preferred contractor, and she'd made calls to city officials suggesting his work was unreliable. Brennan Associates had lost the contract, and unable to recover from the financial blow, had dissolved 2 years later. I tracked down Michael Brennan through LinkedIn. He was working as a project manager for a larger firm, now his dream of running his own practice apparently abandoned. I invited him to coffee and told him I wanted to buy the intellectual property and business name of Brennan Associates, which technically still existed as a dormant corporation. Michael looked at me with obvious confusion. "Why would you want that? The company's been dead for years." "Because I'm going to resurrect it under a new name and a new mission, and I want to hire you to run it." Over the next 2 hours, I explained my vision. We'd rename it Rivers Restoration Group, positioning it as a firm dedicated to ethical architectural practice and restoring integrity to the industry. We'd focus on sustainable design and fair business practices. And we'd make it clear through our marketing and public statements that we stood in opposition to firms and individuals who used influence and manipulation instead of merit. Michael understood what I was really offering: a chance to rebuild what Diana had destroyed, with resources and backing he'd never had before. "You're going after your mother," he said bluntly. "I'm creating an alternative to what she represents. If that happens to undermine her reputation in the process, that's just a side effect of doing good work." He agreed immediately. Within 2 weeks, we'd purchased the dormant corporation, filed the name change paperwork, and begun hiring. I brought in 2 other architects who'd had negative experiences with Diana's interference over the years. People who understood the mission wasn't just about buildings, but about accountability. The Business Journal article appeared 3 weeks after Jennifer sent the initial tip. It was small, just 3 paragraphs in the Ethics Watch section, but it mentioned allegations of fraud and false credentials involving a prominent San Francisco family with ties to architecture and real estate. The article didn't name Diana or Vanessa, but it provided enough context that anyone in their social circle would recognize who was being discussed. I was in my office when I saw it, the print edition spread across my desk. Ethan leaned against the doorframe watching my face. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about the question. I felt focused, clear-headed, purposeful in a way I'd never experienced before. This wasn't angry revenge anymore. It was systematic deconstruction, each piece removed carefully to ensure maximum impact with minimum collateral damage. "Like an architect," I said. "Like someone who understands that before you can build something better, you have to clear the ground of faulty structures." Ethan smiled. "The article is already being shared on social media. People are speculating in the comments." I pulled up Twitter on my laptop and saw that he was right. The architecture and design community in San Francisco was small enough that people were already guessing trading theories about which family the article referenced. Some were defending Diana without naming her. Others were expressing concern about the allegations. The conversation had started. The first cracks were appearing in the foundation of Diana's carefully constructed reputation. And I'd engineered it so precisely that she couldn't point to any specific enemy, couldn't identify who was dismantling her empire piece by piece. Every blueprint starts with demolition, and I had just pressed the button. The Small Business Journal article was just the beginning. Within a week, the San Francisco Chronicle picked up the story, and that's when everything exploded. The headline ran above the fold in the Sunday edition: "Prominent socialite Diana Rivers and daughter face fraud allegations." The article was thorough and damning. It detailed the cease and desist letter sent to Vanessa for copyright infringement, complete with quotes from intellectual property attorneys, explaining how serious the violations were. It mentioned the forged signatures on property documents, though without going into specifics that might compromise ongoing legal proceedings. Most effectively, it included quotes from 3 different people who'd had negative experiences with Diana's business practices over the years, people who'd apparently been waiting for someone to open the door so they could finally speak. One was Michael Brennan, who described how Diana had sabotaged his firm 6 years ago. Another was a woman who'd served on a charity board with Diana and witnessed her manipulating donation records to make herself look more generous than she actually was. The third was a contractor who claimed Diana had pressured him to submit inflated bids on projects so she could steer contracts to friends who kicked back portions of their fees. I read the article 3 times sitting at our kitchen table while morning light streamed through the windows. Ethan was making coffee, unusually quiet. The story had achieved exactly what I'd hoped it made: Diana and Vanessa's behavior public knowledge, backed by enough evidence and testimony that it couldn't be dismissed as gossip or vendetta. By Monday morning, the story had spread across social media. Architecture and design influencers were sharing it with commentary about the importance of ethical practice and the dangers of people falsely claiming professional credentials. Several prominent designers posted their own stories about encountering Vanessa at events where she'd misrepresented her qualifications. The hashtag #FakeArchitect was trending in Bay Area design circles. Vanessa's Instagram, which had been so carefully curated just weeks ago, became a battlefield. Comments on her posts demanded she address the allegations. Her follower count dropped by thousands in a single day. The clients she'd signed canceled their contracts via email, several of them threatening legal action for fraud and misrepresentation. Diana's charity boards moved even faster. By Tuesday afternoon, I learned through a friend who sat on the Arts Council that Diana had been asked to submit her resignation, pending resolution of these serious allegations. The Women's Business Alliance followed suit the next day, releasing a carefully worded statement about maintaining the highest ethical standards and the importance of integrity in leadership. The social consequences were swift and brutal. Diana had spent decades building relationships in San Francisco's elite circles, cultivating an image of refinement and philanthropic commitment. Now, those same circles were closing ranks against her. Former friends stopped returning calls. Social invitations that should have arrived for upcoming galas and fundraisers simply didn't come. I heard from multiple sources that people were actively avoiding Diana at the few events she still dared to attend, creating awkward spaces around her at cocktail parties, turning away when she approached. Diana's response was predictable and disastrous. She granted an interview to Pacific Heights magazine, a glossy society publication that had featured her numerous times over the years. The article, titled "Diana Rivers Speaks Out," showed her in her living room looking elegant but wounded, claiming the entire situation was a terrible misunderstanding orchestrated by jealous competitors who resent my family's success. She never mentioned me by name, but the implication was clear. She painted herself as a victim of corporate warfare, suggested that the copyright claims were baseless technicalities, and insisted that Vanessa was a talented designer being unfairly targeted. The interview was meant to generate sympathy and restore her reputation. Instead, it backfired spectacularly. A legal analyst from Stanford appeared on a local news program the next evening and systematically dismantled Diana's claims, explaining in clear terms how copyright law worked and why Vanessa's actions constituted obvious infringement. The analyst showed side-by-side comparisons of my registered designs and Vanessa's social media posts, making it impossible for any reasonable person to claim this was a misunderstanding. The Chronicle ran a follow-up piece titled, "When Damage Control Becomes More Damage," analyzing how Diana's interview had only drawn more attention to her family's legal problems and made her look either dishonest or dangerously out of touch with reality. I watched all of this unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. Every morning brought new developments, new consequences, new evidence that the empire Diana had built was collapsing exactly as I'd designed it to. But I also felt the weight of what I'd set in motion, the knowledge that there was no going back from this. That's when Ethan finally told me what he'd been holding back. We were having dinner at home, both of us quiet, when he set down his fork and said, "I need to tell you something about the stock transfer fraud. Something I should have told you months ago." My stomach tightened. "What?" "I knew about it before we got married. I found it 6 months before the wedding when I was doing financial due diligence for our joint accounts. I saw the discrepancy in the signatures, ran the analysis, and confirmed it was forged." I stared at him, not quite believing what I was hearing. "You knew my mother committed fraud using my identity, and you didn't tell me." "I wanted to tell you every single day. But I also knew that if I told you, it would become my discovery, my fight. You'd be reacting to information I gave you rather than finding your own path to the truth." He met my eyes steadily. "I wanted you to discover it yourself so you'd choose to fight because you decided to, not because I told you to." "That's not your decision to make," I said, anger rising in my chest. "You don't get to decide what information I'm ready for or how I should discover things about my own life." "You're right. I'm sorry. It was paternalistic and I regret it. But Camille, I also saw what happened every time your family hurt you. You'd be angry for a day or two, then you'd make excuses for them, convince yourself it wasn't that bad, fall back into old patterns. I needed you to see the full scope of what they'd done without my influence, so the decision to fight back would be entirely yours. I stood up from the table, needing space to process this. Ethan had kept a major secret from me, made decisions about my life without my consent, all while claiming it was for my benefit. It felt like a violation, even though I understood his reasoning. I trusted you completely, I said, and you were manipulating me just in a different way than my family does. No, his voice was firm. Your family manipulates you to serve their interests. I stepped back to let you serve your own. There's a difference. I wanted to argue, but part of me knew he was right. If he'd told me about the forgery before the wedding, I might have confronted Diana privately, given her a chance to explain, allowed myself to be talked into believing it was a mistake or misunderstanding. Finding it myself after everything else had left no room for excuses or denial. Don't ever keep something like that from me again, I said finally. I won't. I promise. The tension between us didn't disappear immediately, but it began to ease. That night, lying in bed, unable to sleep, I thought about the difference between Ethan's silence and my family's lies. He'd withheld information to give me agency. They'd withheld it to take agency away. The distinction mattered even if both had left me feeling manipulated. By the end of the week, the media storm had reached a crescendo. Every major Bay Area publication had covered the story. Diana's name was permanently associated with fraud and deception. Vanessa had shut down her social media accounts entirely, unable to handle the constant criticism and mockery. They'd wanted attention, recognition, the spotlight of success and admiration. Now the whole city was watching them fall. The media storm had been raging for 2 weeks when my father showed up at my door unannounced. It was a Saturday morning and Ethan had gone for a run, leaving me alone with coffee and project proposals spread across the dining table. When the doorbell rang, I checked the security camera and saw Arthur standing on the porch, hands in his pockets, looking diminished in a way that made him almost unrecognizable. I considered not answering. But curiosity won out, or maybe some remnant of daughterly obligation I hadn't fully excised yet. I opened the door. Camille. His voice cracked on my name. Can we talk, please? He looked terrible. His face was gray and gaunt with deep shadows under his eyes that suggested weeks of poor sleep. His clothes, usually neat and pressed, were rumpled. He'd aged a decade in the 4 months since my wedding, the stress carving new lines around his mouth and across his forehead. I stepped aside to let him in. He followed me to the living room but didn't sit when I gestured to the sofa, instead standing near the window with his back to the view as if he couldn't bear to look at anything beautiful. I haven't slept properly in 6 weeks, he said without preamble. Every time I close my eyes, I see your face at the wedding. The moment your mother made that announcement. You didn't cry or scream, you just smiled. And I knew right then that we'd finally pushed you too far. You knew before that, Dad. You knew when you let her plan it. You admitted as much during that phone call with Vanessa. I know. He rubbed his face with both hands. I've known for years that what we were doing to you was wrong. Every comparison, every time she gave Vanessa credit for your achievements, every time she dismissed your work as less valuable than your sister's charm. I knew. And I said nothing. Why are you here? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He finally moved to sit down, perching on the edge of the sofa like he might need to flee at any moment. I need to tell you something about the stock transfer. The one Diana forged your signature on. My pulse quickened. What about it? I knew she was doing it. I saw the documents on her desk in March of 2018, saw your signature that I knew wasn't real because I'd just seen you sign tax returns the week before, and the writing was completely different. He swallowed hard. I asked her about it. She told me to mind my own business, that she was handling family finances, and I should trust her. So I did. Or I pretended to. You saw her commit fraud and said nothing. Worse than that. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I signed some of the supporting documents, tax forms related to the transfer corporate filings that needed a witness signature. I told myself I was just facilitating a family business transaction, that maybe you'd signed something I hadn't seen, that Diana wouldn't actually forge your name. But I knew Camille. Deep down, I knew exactly what she was doing. The weight of his confession settled over the room. My father wasn't just a passive enabler. He was an active participant in the fraud, his signature on documents that made the forged transfer look legitimate. Why? I asked. Why would you help her do that to me? Because I was afraid of her. Afraid of what would happen if I opposed her, if I forced her to face consequences. She'd have blamed me, made my life unbearable, maybe even left me. He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. I chose my own comfort over your well-being. I chose 40 years of habit over doing the right thing. I'm a coward, and I've been one for so long I don't know how to be anything else. You came here to confess. I came here to beg. The tears spilled over, now running down his weathered face. If you pursue this legally, if you report the forgery to authorities, your mother will face criminal charges. And so will I. I'm implicated in the fraud, Camille. My signatures are on those documents. If she goes to prison, I go with her. I sat back, processing what he was telling me. All this time, I'd thought of my father as Diana's victim, a weak man bullied into silence by a domineering wife. But he was more than that. He'd actively participated in crimes against me, signed his name to documents that facilitated theft from his own daughter, all to maintain his comfortable life and avoid his wife's displeasure. You want me to let it go, I said flatly. I want you to understand that bringing criminal charges will destroy what's left of this family. Your mother and I will both face prosecution. Vanessa will be left alone to deal with her own legal problems. The scandal will be even worse than it already is. And I should care about that because we're still your parents. Because somewhere under all the mistakes and the cruelty there was love. Because sending us to prison won't undo the harm that's already been done. His voice was desperate now, pleading. I'm not asking you to forgive us. I'm asking you to show mercy we don't deserve. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street where I'd learned to ride a bike, where my father had run beside me, holding the seat until I found my balance. That memory felt like it belonged to someone else's childhood. Someone whose father would protect her rather than participate in her exploitation. You chose survival over integrity, I said. Every single time you had a choice, you chose the easy path. You let Mom steal my art competition award. You let her control and manipulate us. You watched her try to buy off Ethan. You helped her commit fraud. And now you want mercy. I know I don't deserve it. You're right, you don't. I turned to face him. But I need to think about what I deserve. Whether pursuing criminal charges against my own parents serves any purpose beyond revenge. Whether that makes me like her, or whether it makes me someone who values justice over family loyalty. Arthur nodded slowly, seeming to understand that this was the best he could hope for. He stood moving like a man much older than his 65 years. There's one more thing, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a sealed envelope yellowed with age, my name written across it in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. Your grandfather gave this to me before he died. Made me promise to give it to you if you ever needed to know the truth about your mother. I think this is that time. He held it out to me. I took it, feeling the weight of old paper and old secrets. What's in it? I don't know. He sealed it in front of me and said I should never open it. Said it was for your eyes only. Arthur moved toward the door, then paused. I'm sorry, Camille. For all of it. I'm sorry I wasn't the father you deserved. Then Dad handed me a sealed envelope. Your grandfather wanted you to have this. After my father left, I sat at the dining table staring at the envelope for 20 minutes before I could bring myself to open it. My grandfather's handwriting was elegant and precise, the kind of penmanship they don't teach anymore. Just seeing it made my chest ache with missing him, remembering afternoons in his workshop where he'd taught me to measure twice and cut once, where he'd listened to my dreams of becoming an architect with the seriousness they deserved. I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out several sheets of paper handwritten on legal pad paper and dated March 2014, 2 years before he died. A small USB drive fell out with them, landing on the table with a soft click. The letter began simply, "My dearest Camille, if you're reading this, it means the family has fractured in the way I always feared it would." My hands trembled as I read his explanation. He'd created 2 wills, he wrote, because he understood Diana better than she ever realized. The public will probate it after his death, and filed with the court divided his estate between Diana as his daughter and me as his granddaughter, with smaller bequests to various charities and distant relatives. But there was a second will, a private document held by his personal attorney, Richard Chen, with specific instructions about when it should be revealed. "I've instructed Richard to monitor the family situation," my grandfather wrote. "If you reach age 35 without conflict, he should give you this letter as a birthday gift. But if he sees evidence that Diana has abused her position, manipulated you, or violated the trust I placed in her as a parent and executor, he should deliver this immediately. The fact that you're reading this now tells me my worst fears have come true." The private will, he explained, established a trust fund containing the bulk of his actual wealth assets he'd carefully moved into protected accounts in the years before his death. Real estate holdings, investment portfolios, the controlling shares of businesses he'd started. Everything Diana thought she'd inherited had been conditional, subject to one simple requirement: that she treat me with fairness and respect, that she support my dreams rather than diminish them. "If Diana has failed in this," he wrote, "the trust activates fully in your name. Everything I built, everything I wanted to leave behind belongs to you alone. Not because you're blood and she isn't, though that's part of the truth you need to know, but because you have the character to use resources wisely and the integrity to build rather than destroy." I had to stop reading. "Not because you're blood and she isn't." I read the sentence 3 more times, trying to make the words mean something other than what they clearly stated. With shaking hands, I inserted the USB drive into my laptop. A single video file appeared labeled simply, "For Camille." I clicked play. My grandfather appeared on screen, sitting in his study surrounded by bookshelves I recognized. He looked frail, his skin papery and pale, but his eyes were clear and focused. The timestamp showed this was recorded in January 2016, just weeks before he died. "Hello, sweetheart," he said, his voice weaker than I remembered, but still warm. "If you're watching this, Richard has determined that your mother has betrayed the trust I placed in her. I'm sorry you had to discover this, but you need to know the truth both for legal reasons and for your own understanding of why things happened the way they did." He paused, seeming to gather strength. "Diana is not my biological daughter. She was your grandmother's child from a brief relationship before we married, a relationship that ended badly. When your grandmother and I fell in love, Diana was 8 years old. I adopted her, legally raised her as my own, loved her as completely as any father could love a daughter. But she always knew the truth. Your grandmother told her when she was 12, thinking honesty was better than secrets." My grandfather's face on the screen showed such sadness. Diana never forgave her mother for that honesty. She spent her whole life trying to prove she was worthy of being my real daughter, trying to earn a status she thought she didn't deserve. I tried to show her that love makes family, not blood. But she never believed it. And when you were born, when I looked at you and saw my own mother's eyes looking back at me, saw my hands in your hands, I think Diana realized you had something she could never have, my genetic legacy." He coughed, the sound rattling in his chest. "I don't tell you this to hurt you or to diminish Diana. I tell you because her fear of being exposed, her terror that you'd discover she wasn't blood, has driven every cruel thing she's done to you. She saw you as a threat to her legitimacy. And I'm guessing that's why she's stolen from you now, why she's tried to diminish your achievements and elevate Vanessa's. She's trying to erase the evidence of who the real heir is." The video showed him pulling out documents, holding them up to the camera. "This trust, these assets, they were always meant for you. Not because Diana wasn't worthy, but because she couldn't be trusted to treat you fairly. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped she'd prove me wrong. But I planned for the worst because a good architect always plans for structural failure. He smiled then, that knowing smile I remembered from childhood. You're an architect too, Camille. You understand that buildings need strong foundations, that you can't build anything lasting on lies and deception. Everything in this trust is yours. The controlling shares of Rivers Commercial Properties that Diana thinks she sold, they weren't hers to sell. The real shares were held in trust, and her transaction was void. The properties, the investments, all of it belongs to you now. I paused the video, trying to process what I was hearing. The company shares Diana had sold to Marcus Ashford, using my forged signature, hadn't been hers to sell in the first place. The transaction was fraudulent on multiple levels. I hit play again. My grandfather was still talking. I know this is overwhelming, sweetheart. But you need to understand, Diana has lived in fear her entire adult life. Fear that people would discover she wasn't really a Rivers by blood, that her success was borrowed legitimacy, that she was somehow less than. That fear made her cruel. It made her view your legitimate claims to this family's legacy as threats rather than rights. He leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. Use these resources to protect yourself. Build something beautiful with them. And if possible, find it in your heart to pity your mother, even if you can't forgive her. She's spent 60 years running from a truth that never mattered to anyone but her. The video ended with my grandfather's final words spoken with such gentle finality. She's not my blood. You are. And blood doesn't lie, people do. I sat with my grandfather's revelation for 3 days before I did anything. The video, the letter, the trust documents, all of it stayed locked in my office safe while I processed what it meant. Diana wasn't my grandfather's biological daughter. She'd known this her entire adult life, had built every cruelty on a foundation of insecurity and fear. The woman who'd stolen from me, humiliated me, manipulated me, had done it all because she saw me as proof of her own illegitimacy. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt something more complicated, a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. Understanding the source of someone's cruelty doesn't erase the damage they've caused, but it changes how you see them. Diana wasn't just evil. She was broken, and she'd spent 60 years breaking everyone around her to hide her own fractures. But understanding didn't mean mercy. It meant strategy informed by knowledge rather than blind rage. On the 4th day, I called Richard Chen, my grandfather's attorney. He was 73 now, semi-retired, but still maintaining a small practice for select clients. We met at his office in the financial district, a space filled with law books and framed diplomas that spoke to decades of meticulous work. Your grandfather was one of the smartest men I ever knew, Richard said, sliding the official trust documents across his mahogany desk. He saw this coming 20 years ago, maybe longer. The trust was extraordinary in its scope. My grandfather had quietly moved assets for years before his death, creating a network of holdings that Diana had never known existed. The office building where her property management company rented space owned by the trust. Shares in 3 businesses she'd invested in controlled by the trust. A commercial property in Oakland adjacent to land she'd recently purchased for development trust owned. He'd built a financial structure around her without her knowledge, and now it all belonged to me. What do I do with it? I asked Richard. Whatever serves justice, he said simply. Your grandfather's only instruction was that you use it wisely. I began the acquisitions through Rivers Restoration, LLC, using the same shell company structure that had sent the cease and desist letter to Vanessa. Each transaction was handled by different law firms, different intermediaries, layers of legitimate business operations that made it impossible to trace back to me. When the trust purchased the office building Diana's company operated from, the transaction appeared to be a simple property investment by an LLC interested in commercial real estate. The new ownership sent her a polite letter informing her that lease terms would remain the same. She had no idea she was now paying rent to me. Over the following weeks, I systematically acquired leverage. Shares in her business investments, property rights, even the parking lot adjacent to her office where she'd reserved a specific space for 20 years. Everything was legal, properly documented, defensible in any court. Ethan helped me structure each acquisition to ensure perfect compliance, knowing Diana would eventually look for any irregularity she could exploit. "You're playing the long game," Ethan observed one evening as we reviewed acquisition documents in my home office. "Most people would confront her with this wave it in her face." "That's what she would do," I said. "Public displays of power, dramatic revelations, forcing people to acknowledge her control. But that's not strength. That's insecurity seeking validation. And you don't need validation. I need justice. There's a difference." But maintaining that cold strategic focus was harder than I'd expected. Late at night, unable to sleep, I'd pull out old family photo albums and study them with new eyes. Pictures of my grandmother holding infant Diana, the tender expression on her face suggesting love regardless of biology. Photos of my grandfather teaching teenage Diana to drive his hand on her shoulder, his smile genuine. He'd chosen her, adopted her, loved her fully, but she'd never believed it was enough. I found myself looking for signs of the insecurity my grandfather had described, the fear that had eventually curdled into cruelty. There, in a photo from Diana's wedding to my father, the way she held herself rigid and perfect, her smile beautiful but somehow desperate. And there, at my first architecture award ceremony when I was 16, Diana standing behind me with her hands clenched, her expression that I'd read as pride, but now recognized as something closer to resentment. Understanding her didn't mean forgiving her, but it meant seeing her completely recognizing that the woman who'd tried to destroy me was herself destroyed long before I was born. I started keeping a private journal, something I hadn't done since college. In it, I worked through the complexity of feeling both righteous anger and reluctant compassion of wanting justice, while recognizing that the person who'd hurt me most was also a victim of her own fears. The writing helped me maintain clarity, separating what I felt from what I needed to do. By the end of the 6th month after my wedding, I controlled more of Diana's financial infrastructure than she did. Her office building, key business investments, strategic property holdings, all technically mine though, she remained blissfully unaware. I hadn't announced any of it, hadn't confronted her, hadn't given her any indication that the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Ethan asked me once what the endgame was, what I planned to do with all this power I'd quietly accumulated. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "But I want her to know what it feels like to have everything and then discover it was never really yours. I want her to understand that the legitimacy she spent her whole life chasing was always an illusion, that real power comes from integrity, not control." She may never understand that. Maybe not, but I will. They walked through life thinking they owned everything, not knowing I was already holding the keys. The civil case of Rivers Trust versus Diana M. Rivers was scheduled for Superior Court in early October, 8 months after my wedding. My legal team had filed the suit, carefully framing it entirely around breach of trust conditions and fraudulent property transfers. We weren't challenging Diana's right to have been adopted or loved by my grandfather. We were demonstrating that she'd violated the explicit terms under which his estate had been left to her. The courtroom was packed. I'd expected media, but the turnout exceeded even my attorney's predictions. 3 sketch artists sat in the gallery since cameras weren't allowed. Reporters from the Chronicle, the Business Journal, and even a few national outlets that covered white-collar crime filled the benches, and scattered throughout were faces I recognized from my wedding society friends who'd applauded Diana for years, and now came to watch her fall. Diana arrived dressed for battle in a Chanel suit the color of winter ice. Her hair perfect, her makeup carefully applied to hide the stress I knew she must be feeling. She walked to the defendant's table with her head high, every inch the dignified matriarch being persecuted by an ungrateful daughter. Her attorney, Gerald Morrison, was one of the most expensive lawyers in the city, a man known for defending wealthy clients against fraud allegations. I sat at the plaintiff's table with my team, dressed in a simple navy suit, no jewelry except my wedding ring. I'd debated whether Ethan should attend, but we'd agreed his presence might make this look like a coordinated attack rather than my individual pursuit of justice. He was at his office waiting for updates ready to come if I needed him. Judge Patricia Huang entered and we all rose. She was in her early 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency and intolerance for legal games. She'd reviewed the preliminary filings, and according to my attorney had already expressed concern about the forged signatures and trust violations. The opening statements were clinical. My attorney Marcus Webb laid out the case methodically, a grandfather who'd created a conditional trust, a daughter who'd violated every condition through fraud and manipulation, and a granddaughter seeking enforcement of her rightful inheritance. Morrison countered that this was a family dispute being weaponized through the courts, that Diana had acted in good faith based on her understanding of her father's wishes, and that Camille was motivated by greed rather than justice. Then came the evidence presentation. Marcus introduced the public will, first the one everyone knew about showing the equal division of assets. Then he introduced the private trust documents authenticated by Richard Chen's testimony about my grandfather's explicit instructions. The courtroom murmured as the conditions were read aloud. This trust activates in favor of Camille Rivers if Diana Rivers is found to have abused family trust for personal gain, manipulated Camille's legal or financial rights, or taken actions that demonstrate she values control over her daughter's well-being. Morrison objected repeatedly, but Judge Huang overruled him each time. The documents were properly executed, properly witnessed, and legally binding. Then Marcus played the video. The courtroom fell silent as my grandfather appeared on the large screen that had been set up for evidence presentation. Seeing him again, hearing his voice fill that formal space made my throat tighten. I watched Diana's face instead of the screen. She'd gone completely still, her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack around the edges. My grandfather's voice was clear despite his physical frailty. "Camille, if you're watching this, Diana has hidden it from you." Morrison stood to object, but Judge Huang waved him down. "This is authenticated testimony from the truster. Sit down, counselor." The video continued. My grandfather explained the dual wills, the conditional trust, his reasoning. And then came the part I knew would destroy Diana's carefully constructed world. "There's something else you need to know. Diana is not my biological daughter. She is my late wife's daughter from before our marriage, whom I adopted and loved as my own. But she was never blood. You are my only blood descendant." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, the scratch of pencils as reporters frantically took notes. Morrison was on his feet again, shouting about relevance and prejudice, but the damage was done. Every eye turned to Diana. She was shaking her hands, gripping the table in front of her so hard her knuckles had gone white. Her perfect facade was crumbling in real-time cracks, spreading across her composure like fractures in glass. My grandfather's voice continued, implacable and loving and final. "Diana has always known this truth, and she's terrified of others discovering it. If she has stolen from you, used you, or tried to erase your legacy, this trust and all associated property rights belong to you alone. Not because she isn't worthy of love, but because she cannot be trusted with power over someone she perceives as a threat to her legitimacy." Morrison requested a recess. Judge Huang was about to grant it when Diana stood abruptly, the movement so sudden her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Stop," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying through the silent courtroom. "Just stop." "Mrs. Rivers, please sit down," Morrison hissed, reaching for her arm. She shook him off. "I am not his blood daughter." Diana's voice grew louder, stronger, powered by something that looked like decades of suppressed truth finally breaking free. "I was never his real daughter. Everything I built, every achievement, every position I held, it was all to prove I deserved to be his daughter." "Diana, don't," Morrison pleaded, but she ignored him completely. Tears were streaming down her face now, destroying her makeup, revealing the aged woman beneath the careful preservation. "I took from Camille because she had what I never could. His blood, his eyes, his talent. She was real. I was just adopted, Just someone else's mistake that he was kind enough to claim. The judge was calling for order, but no one was listening. The courtroom had become theater, a public unraveling of a woman who'd spent her entire life performing strength. The judge's ruling was clear. Diana had violated every condition of the trust. Everything she'd controlled for 30 years now belonged to me. The court documents arrived by courier 3 days after the ruling. Thick manila envelopes containing property deeds, stock certificates, trust account authorizations, all bearing my name now instead of Diana's. I spread them across my office desk in neat rows, organizing them by asset type, the way I might organize blueprints for a complex project. Real estate holdings, investment portfolios, business interests, the controlling shares of companies I'd never even known existed. On paper, I'd won everything. The judge's ruling had been unambiguous. Diana had violated the trust conditions through fraud, manipulation, and abuse of family relationships. Therefore, per my grandfather's explicit instructions, all discretionary assets transferred to me. Not some of them, not half, all of them. I sat in my office chair as afternoon light slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes in the air, and casting shadows across the documents that represented my total victory. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated, powerful. Instead, I felt hollow like a building with a beautiful facade but nothing inside. My family was destroyed. That was the truth I couldn't escape, no matter how justified my actions had been. Diana's public breakdown in court had been captured by every reporter present. Her confession about not being real, about never being enough, splashed across newspapers and websites. Vanessa had fled the city entirely, supposedly staying with friends in Los Angeles, too humiliated to show her face in San Francisco. My father had called once, 2 days after the ruling, but I'd let it go to voicemail. His message was brief. I don't blame you for any of this, but I don't know how to talk to you anymore either. I picked up one of the property deeds, the one for the Pacific Heights house where I'd grown up. It was mine now. I could evict Diana and Arthur, move in myself, turn it into something else entirely. The power to do that sat right here in my hands, legally unassailable. But the symmetry disturbed me. Diana had spent her entire life consumed by insecurity about her legitimacy, and that insecurity had turned her cruel. Now I held all the power she'd desperately tried to control, and I could feel something dark stirring in me too. Not insecurity, but something equally dangerous. The intoxication of total victory. The temptation to use my power, not for justice, but for the simple pleasure of watching her suffer. Was I becoming her, just with better justifications? The office door opened quietly. I didn't turn around, but I knew it was Ethan from his footsteps, the familiar rhythm of his presence. He didn't say anything at first, just pulled up the other chair and sat beside me, looking at the spread of documents. We sat in silence for several minutes. That was one of the things I loved most about him. He understood when silence was more valuable than words. Finally, he spoke. How do you feel? I don't know. I admitted. Empty. Tired. Like I've been running towards something for so long that now that I've reached it, I don't know what to do. You won, he said simply. Did I destroyed my family. My mother had a complete psychological breakdown in open court. My sister is in hiding. My father can barely look at me. I have all this power now, all these assets. But what did I actually win? Ethan leaned back in his chair, considering. You won justice. You proved that actions have consequences, that you can't steal from people and manipulate them and expect no accountability. That matters. Does it matter enough to justify this? I gestured at the newspapers I'd collected, the ones with headlines about Diana's courtroom confession photos of her tear-stained face. Only you can answer that. He paused, then continued carefully. But I'll tell you what I think. Power isn't burning bridges while people watch. It's choosing to walk away while they still expect you to fight. You've proven everything you needed to prove Camille. The question now is what you do next, and that's what will define who you are. I looked at him, this man who'd stood beside me through all of this, who'd helped me build the case, but never pushed me toward cruelty. What would you do? That's not my decision to make. But I'd ask myself, do I want to be someone who uses power to heal or someone who uses it to punish? Both are valid choices, depending on what you value more. Do you think I should forgive her? The question came out smaller than I'd intended, vulnerable in a way I rarely allowed myself to be. Ethan shook his head slowly. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip because someone tells you it's the right thing to do. It's a bridge you might build someday, but only if the other person is willing to meet you halfway. Your mother has never walked toward you, Camille. She's only ever pulled you toward her on her terms for her purposes. Real reconciliation would require her to fundamentally change. And in 34 years, have you ever seen evidence she's capable of that? I thought about Diana at the wedding announcing the house transfer with that satisfied smile. Diana bribing Ethan to leave me. Diana forging my signature to sell my inheritance. Diana in court finally telling the truth, but only because she'd been cornered, not because she'd chosen honesty. No, I said. I haven't. Then forgiveness might not be what this situation needs. Maybe what it needs is boundaries, consequences, and you deciding what kind of person you want to be now that you're not fighting for survival anymore. I looked back at the documents spread across my desk. So much power, so many choices. I could destroy Diana, completely take the house, liquidate her remaining assets, ensure she spent her final years with nothing. The law would support me. Public opinion after her courtroom confession would probably support me too. Or I could choose something else. Something I hadn't fully defined yet, but that felt less like revenge and more like justice tempered with mercy. I need time to think, I said. Take all the time you need. Ethan stood, kissed the top of my head, and moved toward the door. He paused before leaving. You're not your mother, Camille. The fact that you're even asking these questions proves that. After he left, I sat alone with my victory with all its power and all its cost. I held all the power now, but that didn't answer the question of what to do with it. The letter arrived at my office on a Tuesday morning, delivered by regular mail, rather than courier or certified delivery. My assistant brought it in with the rest of the correspondence, and I almost set it aside with the bills and promotional materials before I noticed the return address. No name, just a Los Angeles zip code I didn't recognize. But the handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably Vanessa's, that flowing script she'd perfected in the expensive private schools Diana had insisted on. I held the envelope for a long moment before opening it, feeling the thickness of multiple pages inside. Vanessa hadn't contacted me since fleeing to Los Angeles 3 weeks ago. No calls, no texts, nothing. I'd assumed she was hiding, licking her wounds, perhaps consulting lawyers about whether she had any recourse against the court's ruling. A letter seemed oddly old-fashioned, deliberate in a way that made me cautious. I opened it carefully, unfolding 8 pages of cream-colored stationery covered in Vanessa's handwriting. The pages themselves told a story before I read a single word. There were crossed-out sentences, spots where the ink had blurred from what could only be tears, places where she'd clearly stopped writing and then started again with slightly different pen pressure. This wasn't a carefully composed legal document or a calculated manipulation. This was raw and messy and real. Dear Camille, it began. I've started this letter 17 times. I keep trying to find the right words, the perfect way to say what I need to say. And then I realize that's exactly the problem. I've spent my entire life looking for the perfect performance, the right thing to say to make people like me. So I'm just going to write the truth even if it's ugly and imperfect. I sat down at my desk, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. Mom threatened me, Vanessa wrote. Not physically, but in all the ways that mattered. 2 weeks before your wedding, she told me that if I didn't go along with her plan to transfer the house to me, she'd cut me off completely. No more allowance, no more use of her connections, no more financial support. I panicked because I have no real skills, Camille. I'm 37 years old and I've never held an actual job. I've never built anything or created anything or earned anything on my own. The thought of being cut off terrified me. The next paragraph was heavily edited with several sentences crossed out before she'd apparently found the words she wanted. But that's not an excuse. I could have said no. I could have stood up to her. I could have warned you what she was planning. I didn't do any of those things because I was weak and because part of me was jealous. You were always the talented one, the smart one, the one with a real future. I was just the pretty face Mom paraded around at parties, and I knew even that wouldn't last forever. When she offered me a chance to be seen as successful like you, I took it because I was desperate to feel valuable. I had to stop reading for a moment, blinking back unexpected tears. I'd spent so long being angry at Vanessa, seeing her as Diana's willing accomplice, that I'd never really considered how Diana had manipulated her too. Different methods, different weaknesses, exploited but manipulation nonetheless. The letter continued, and Vanessa's handwriting became shakier, as if she was crying while writing. I see now that I was just Mom's puppet doing to you what was done to her. She spent her whole life trying to steal legitimacy instead of building it, and she taught me to do the same. She'd compare us, constantly telling me I'd never be as smart as you, then turning around and telling you that you'd never be as charming as me. She used us against each other, and I was too stupid or too cowardly to see it. She described specific instances I'd forgotten or never known about Diana telling Vanessa she was worthless without her looks, that her only value was in making good connections and marrying well. Diana using my achievements to shame Vanessa. Your sister won another award. Why can't you accomplish anything? And then turning to me and saying variations of, Vanessa has so many friends, why are you always alone with your books? She made us both feel inadequate, Vanessa wrote, just in different ways. And instead of recognizing that we were both victims of her need to control everything, I competed with you. I let her turn us into enemies when we should have been allies. The next section was the hardest to read. Vanessa detailed the moment she realized what she'd become sitting in her Los Angeles apartment, watching news coverage of Diana's courtroom breakdown. I saw Mom confessing that she'd stolen from you because you were real and she was just adopted, and I realized I'd done the exact same thing. I'd tried to steal your reputation, your work, your legitimacy because I had nothing real of my own. I'd become her. The one thing I never wanted to be, and I'd become her anyway. The letter's final page was the most raw. I don't expect you to forgive me, Camille. I don't even think I deserve to be in your life. I participated in every humiliation, every theft, every moment of cruelty. I laughed at your wedding when Mom announced she was giving your house to me. I claimed credit for your architectural work. I built a fake business on your reputation. I was an active participant in hurting you, and saying I was manipulated doesn't erase that. She concluded simply, I'm sorry. Those words don't mean much after everything I've done, but they're true. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to build something real, something I actually earned instead of stealing from you or anyone else. I've enrolled in community college classes. I'm working as a receptionist at a dental office, my first real job ever. I'm learning what it means to earn things rather than have them given to me or taken from others. I don't know if I'll ever be someone you'd want to know, but I'm trying to become someone I can respect. That's all I wanted to say. You don't need to respond. I just needed you to know the truth. Vanessa. I read the letter 3 times, tears falling, despite my attempts to remain detached. This wasn't the Vanessa I'd known my whole life, the charming socialite who'd always seemed so confident and untouchable. This was someone broken and trying to put herself back together. Someone finally taking responsibility instead of making excuses. I didn't know whether to reply or let silence speak for me. I was still holding Vanessa's letter when my doorbell rang that evening. Through the security camera, I saw my father standing on the porch clutching something against his chest. He looked older than he had even a month ago, the weight of everything that had happened settling into his posture like concrete. I opened the door. He didn't ask to come in, just stood there looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Sadness, certainly, but also something that might have been relief. "I need to tell you about your mother," he said. "The whole story. The one she never wanted anyone to know." I stepped aside to let him enter. He moved to the living room and set down what he'd been carrying, a leather photo album cracked with age, the kind people kept before everything became digital. He sat on the sofa and opened it carefully like it might fall apart in his hands. "Your mother's birth mother was named Elena Morales." He began, his voice quiet but steady. "She worked as a housekeeper for your grandfather's family starting in 1956. She was young, maybe 19, and she'd come from Mexico looking for a better life. Your grandfather was already established then, building his real estate business, recently widowed after your grandmother died in a car accident." He showed me a photograph, yellowed and slightly faded. A young woman in a simple dress holding the hand of a small girl with dark curls. The girl's face was unmistakably Diana, maybe 5 or 6 years old before life had taught her to perform. Elena died when Diana was 8. An aneurysm, sudden and devastating. Your grandfather had 2 choices: send Diana to relatives in Guadalajara, who she'd never met, or keep her himself. Arthur turned the page, showing me another photo, my grandfather younger but recognizable, with his hand on young Diana's shoulder. He chose to keep her. Formally adopted her, gave her his name, raised her exactly as he would have raised his own biological daughter. "That must have been unusual for the time," I said. "It was extraordinary. A wealthy white widower adopting his housekeeper's Mexican daughter in 1964. San Francisco society didn't know what to make of it. Your grandfather didn't care. He loved Elena, I think, though it wasn't something they could have made public in those days. And he loved Diana completely, never treated her as anything less than his real daughter." Arthur's expression darkened. "But society wasn't so kind. Diana grew up in private schools and country clubs where everyone knew she was the housekeeper's daughter. The other children's parents whispered it. Charity case. Not really a Rivers. Playing dress-up in someone else's life. She heard it all even when people thought she wasn't listening." He showed me more photos: Diana at cotillion, standing slightly apart from the other girls. Diana at her high school graduation, her smile bright but her eyes guarded. Diana at various society events, always perfectly dressed, always performing. "She became obsessed with proving she belonged," Arthur continued. "Every aspect of her appearance, her manners, her social connections, it all became armor against the whispers. She learned to control situations before they could control her. She married me specifically because my family had the kind of old money lineage she felt she lacked. The Rivers name was respected, but in her mind it would always have an asterisk. The Arthur family name had no asterisks." "She told you all this?" I asked. "Eventually. After we were married, during fights when she'd had too much wine and her guard came down. She told me about the weight of being adopted, of never feeling truly legitimate no matter what your grandfather said or did. He gave her everything, loved her completely, but she couldn't accept it because society had taught her it wasn't real." He turned to a page showing my grandfather holding me as a newborn, his face full of joy and wonder. "And then you were born. Diana saw in you everything she feared: actual blood ties to the Rivers, name your grandfather's eyes, his hands, his instinct for creating things. You were the biological grandchild she could never give him, and instead of feeling joy at your birth, she felt threatened." I stared at the photo, understanding dawning with painful clarity. She saw me as proof of what she wasn't. "Yes. Every achievement you earned, every time your grandfather praised your talent, every way you resembled him naturally rather than through learned behavior, it was a reminder to her that she was adopted and you weren't. So she diminished you. She elevated Vanessa, who was safely 1 generation removed from the direct comparison. She compared you two constantly, trying to make you feel as inadequate as she'd always felt." Arthur closed the album gently. "I'm not telling you this to excuse what she did. What she did to you was cruel and unforgivable, and you had every right to fight back the way you did. But I thought you deserved to understand why. Your mother spent her whole life fighting a battle against her own legitimacy that existed only in her mind. Your grandfather loved her completely, but she could never believe it was enough. And when you were born with the one thing she could never have, his actual blood, it broke something in her. She could have loved me, I said quietly. She could have seen me as proof that the family accepted her, that I was evidence of her belonging, not a threat to it. She could have, but wounded people don't always make rational choices. They make protective ones even when the protection causes more harm than the original wound. He stood, leaving the album on my coffee table. She's staying with her cousin in Daly City now. She's been diagnosed with severe depression and anxiety. She's finally in therapy, though I don't know if it's too late for her to heal. He moved toward the door, then paused. I failed you, Camille. I watched her hurt you for years, and I said nothing because I was too cowardly to confront her. But I want you to know you were never the problem. You were never inadequate or less than. You were always exactly what your grandfather saw in you, someone worthy of everything he built. She spent her whole life pretending to be someone she already was and nearly destroyed me to protect a lie. A week after my father's visit, Marcus Webb called me to his office for what he described as the final decision. I knew what he meant. We'd compiled everything needed for criminal prosecution: the forged signatures, the fraudulent stock transfers, witness testimony, forensic document analysis. The district attorney's office had reviewed our evidence and was prepared to file charges if I wanted to proceed. Ethan came with me to the meeting. We sat across from Marcus in his conference room, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the polished table. Between us lay a single document, perhaps 20 pages thick, meticulously prepared, and waiting only for my signature. Marcus walked me through it one more time, his voice clinical and professional. This complaint charges Diana Rivers with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and identity theft. The forged stock transfer alone carries a potential sentence of 2 to 4 years. Combined with the other charges, we're looking at a realistic possibility of 6 to 8 years in prison given her age and lack of prior criminal record. If convicted, she'd also face restitution orders and permanent damage to any remaining professional reputation. I stared at the document, my name typed neatly at the bottom above a blank signature line. The prosecutor is interested, Marcus continued. They like cases with clear evidence and high-profile defendants. This would send a message about white-collar crime and family fraud. You'd be doing a public service by holding her accountable. What happens if I don't sign? I asked. Then nothing. The civil case is already resolved in your favor. You have all the assets, all the power. Diana has lost everything that mattered to her: social standing, financial security, respect. She's living in a cousin's spare bedroom in Daly City, seeing a therapist 3 times a week according to the private investigator's last report. But legally, criminally, she faces no consequences. Is that wrong? The question came out before I'd fully formed the thought. I mean, legally, morally, is it wrong to let this go? Marcus set down his pen and looked at me directly. This is your right, Camille. She broke the law repeatedly and deliberately, causing you substantial harm. Justice demands consequences for actions like hers. If she'd done this to a stranger, to a business partner, there wouldn't even be a question. She'd already be facing charges. But she's not a stranger, Ethan said quietly. She's Camille's mother, and that complicates everything. I picked up the document and read through the charges again. Count 1, forgery of signatures on legal documents. Count 2, fraudulent transfer of property. Count 3, identity theft for financial gain. Each count was supported by exhibits, testimony, expert analysis. The case was airtight. Diana would almost certainly be convicted. I tried to imagine her in prison. A 62-year-old woman who'd spent her entire life obsessed with appearances and control, stripped of everything, locked in a cell, wearing a jumpsuit instead of designer clothes. Part of me, the part that still carried the pain of every childhood humiliation and every stolen achievement, wanted that. Wanted to see her face actual consequences, not just social embarrassment, but legal punishment. But another part of me, the part that had listened to my father's story about the housekeeper's daughter, who never felt legitimate, wondered what purpose that punishment would serve. Diana was already destroyed in every way that had mattered to her. Her social standing was gone. Her financial empire had collapsed. Her daughters wanted nothing to do with her. She'd confessed her deepest shame in open court, that confession captured and published for anyone to see forever. What would prison add to that justice? Or just my satisfaction in watching her suffer more? "Can I ask you something?" I said to Marcus. "In your experience, what's the difference between justice and revenge?" He leaned back in his chair, considering the question seriously. "Justice serves society. It protects others from harm, deters future crimes, and maintains social order. Revenge serves the victim's need to see the perpetrator suffer. Sometimes they look the same from the outside, but the motivation is different." "And which is this?" "Only you can answer that. Ask yourself, if Diana were sent to prison, would that protect anyone? Would it deter other parents from manipulating their children? Or would it just satisfy your need to see her punished beyond what she's already lost?" I sat with that question for a long time. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on Marcus's wall and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Ethan didn't push me either direction, just sat beside me with his hand resting lightly on my arm, his presence steady and supporting without influencing. Finally, I picked up the pen. Marcus leaned forward slightly, ready to witness my signature. But instead of signing, I set the pen down again. "File it with the court," I said slowly, working through the decision as I spoke. "But mark it held in abeyance. That's the legal term, right? For charges that are prepared but not actively prosecuted." Marcus nodded. "It means the case is filed but suspended subject to certain conditions." "Then file it that way. If Diana attempts any further manipulation, any fraud, any contact with me that violates boundaries, I'll establish through a restraining order we proceed immediately with prosecution. But if she remains silent, if she accepts the consequences she's already faced, if she genuinely tries to heal and change, then we let the criminal case rest." "You're giving her a chance," Marcus said. "I'm giving myself peace. There's a difference." I looked at Ethan, who was watching me with something like pride in his eyes. "I've already won everything that matters. I have the assets, the truth is public, and I've proven that actions have consequences. Signing this wouldn't add justice. It would just add cruelty, and I don't want to be someone who chooses cruelty when the battle is already over." Marcus made notes on his legal pad. "I'll prepare the filing with the specified conditions. You understand this means she could potentially never face criminal charges, even though she deserves them." "I understand, but what she deserves and what I need to do to live with myself are two different things. My grandfather built his legacy on creating things, not destroying them. I want to honor that even now, especially now." Ethan spoke for the first time since we'd sat down. "Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's choosing peace over the satisfaction of being proven right. You've already won Camille. You don't need to watch her cage to know that." I looked at the unsigned document one more time, then pushed it across the table to Marcus. "File it as I said, and then I want to move forward with the foundation plans we discussed, using the trust assets to create something that helps others who've been manipulated by family members. That's where I want to focus my energy now." As we left Marcus's office, walking out into the late afternoon sunshine, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but something lighter than the rage and determination that had driven me for the past 11 months. I'd made my choice, and it wasn't the choice Diana would have made. She would have pursued destruction to the bitter end, would have needed to see her enemy completely annihilated. But I wasn't her, and I never would be. Justice and revenge aren't the same thing, and I'd finally learned the difference. The call came at 2 a.m, 3 days after I'd decided not to pursue criminal charges. I fumbled for my phone in the darkness, seeing an unfamiliar number with a San Francisco area code. "Ms. Rivers, this is Officer Martinez with SFPD. There's been an incident at the property on Cliff Road. We need you to come down here." I was instantly awake. "What kind of incident? Is someone hurt?" "No injuries, ma'am, but there's been significant property damage and we have a person in custody. Can you come to the scene?" Ethan was already pulling on clothes, having heard enough of the conversation to understand something was wrong. We drove through empty streets, the city quiet in those hours between night and dawn. As we approached the coastal road where the beach house stood, I saw flashing lights painting the fog in alternating blue and red. Police cars blocked the driveway. Officers stood near the entrance, and as we got closer, I could see the front door hanging open, light spilling out into the darkness. When we stepped inside, my breath caught. The destruction was systematic and deliberate. Every custom light fixture I'd designed had been smashed glass and metal scattered across the floors like deadly confetti. The walls I'd spent months choosing the perfect shade of white for were streaked with paint, great slashing arcs of black and red that looked like wounds. In the corner, the architectural models I'd stored here, delicate representations of sustainable building concepts, lay in pieces, crushed beyond recognition. And in the center of the main room, restrained by 2 police officers, was Diana. She looked nothing like the polished society matron who'd announced the house transfer at my wedding. Her hair hung loose and wild around her face. Her expensive clothes were stained with paint. Her eyes were red and swollen, her makeup smeared into dark streaks down her cheeks. She was struggling against the officer's hold, not violently but frantically, like a trapped animal. When she saw me, she stopped struggling. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the ruined room. "Ms. Rivers." Officer Martinez approached me, notebook in hand. We responded to a security alarm at 1:47 a.m. When we arrived, we found Ms. Diana Rivers inside the property. She still had keys from before the ownership transfer. She's caused extensive damage, as you can see. The security cameras captured everything if you want to press charges. Diana laughed, a broken sound that made the officers exchange uncomfortable glances. "Press charges? She's taken everything already. What more can she take?" "Mom," I said quietly, and she flinched at the word. "Don't call me that. You made it very clear in court that I'm not really your mother. Not blood, not real, just the housekeeper's daughter playing dress-up in someone else's family." Her voice rose, becoming shrill and desperate. "If I can't have it, if I can't be the real one, then no one gets it. You think you won. You took everything. My reputation, my money, my place in this family. You stood in that courtroom and watched me fall apart, and you felt nothing." "That's not true," I said, but she wasn't listening. "I just wanted to be real," Diana screamed, and the sound echoed off the damaged walls. "I just wanted to belong. Is that so terrible? To want to be someone's actual daughter instead of a charity case they took pity on?" She collapsed, then her legs giving out, the officers catching her before she hit the floor. She was sobbing now, great heaving cries that shook her whole body. "I just wanted to belong." Same. I watched this woman who'd tormented me my entire life reduced to this broken thing, and I felt an overwhelming sadness that had nothing to do with the destroyed house around us. She'd spent 60 years fighting a battle against her own legitimacy, and she'd lost not because anyone defeated her, but because she'd defeated herself. I turned to Officer Martinez. "I won't be pressing criminal charges for the vandalism, but I need a restraining order. She's not allowed within 500 feet of me or any property I own." "Ma'am, given her mental state, we're going to take her for a psychiatric evaluation. She's clearly in crisis." "Good. She needs help, not jail." I walked over to where Diana sat slumped between the officers and crouched down so we were at eye level. She looked up at me, her face ravaged by tears and years of self-inflicted suffering. "You spent your whole life trying to prove you were legitimate," I said softly. "But Grandpa already gave you legitimacy when he chose you as his daughter. You were real because he loved you. You were real because he raised you, because he gave you his name, because he chose you every single day. But you couldn't see that. You couldn't accept love that was freely given because you thought it needed to be earned through blood. And that's why you lost everything." Diana stared at me, tears still streaming down her face, but she said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The officers helped her to her feet and led her toward the door. She didn't resist, didn't look back, just walked out into the night like a ghost finally released from haunting. After they left, Ethan and I stood in the damaged house surveying the destruction. I should have felt violated, angry, devastated by what she'd done. Instead, I felt oddly calm. "Every design was backed up," Ethan said quietly. "Remember, you digitized everything months ago. The physical models are destroyed, but the actual plans exist in the cloud. We can rebuild this exactly as it was, or we can build something new." I looked around at the ruined space, at the paint-streaked walls and shattered fixtures, and I felt something click into place. Diana had tried to destroy my creative work to erase evidence of my talent and legitimacy. But you can't destroy ideas. You can only destroy their physical manifestations, and those can always be rebuilt. She thought destroying the house would destroy me, but she'd just given me the blueprint for something better. 6 months after Diana's breakdown at the house, I stood before a room full of reporters and community leaders to announce the Rivers Foundation. The press conference was held at a hotel in downtown San Francisco, but the presentation boards behind me showed renderings of what would rise on the coastal property where so much pain had occurred. "I'm here today to announce the creation of the Rivers Foundation." I began, my voice steady, despite the cameras and the weight of what I was about to share publicly for the first time. "This organization will be dedicated to helping women escape family manipulation, financial abuse, and psychological control." I clicked to the next slide showing the architectural plans for a multi-building campus. "We've acquired the property at Cliff Road along with adjacent parcels to create a comprehensive support center. This will include a counseling facility, legal aid offices, temporary housing for women in crisis, and job training spaces. Everything will be designed with both dignity and functionality in mind, because healing spaces should honor the people who use them." A reporter raised her hand. "Ms. Rivers, this seems personal. Can you tell us why you're doing this?" I'd prepared for this question, but actually answering it required me to be more vulnerable than I'd been in any courtroom. I was born into privilege. My family had money, social standing, and access to resources most people never have. But privilege doesn't protect you from family manipulation. My mother used my name to commit fraud, forged my signature on legal documents, stole my professional reputation, and publicly humiliated me at my own wedding. She did these things because she was trapped in her own insecurity about belonging, about legitimacy, about being worthy of love. The room was completely silent now. I could see people leaning forward, reporters' pens moving rapidly across notepads. I fought back using the law and my own resources. I had attorneys, forensic accountants, financial independence, and an education that taught me how systems work. But most women in abusive family situations don't have those tools. They're told that family loyalty means accepting mistreatment. They're gaslit into believing the abuse is their fault. They're financially dependent on the people who hurt them. This foundation exists to give them the weapons. I was lucky enough to have legal support, financial literacy, psychological counseling, and a safe space to rebuild their lives. After the press conference, I spent the next 8 months personally overseeing every aspect of the foundation's design. This wasn't something I could delegate to my firm's junior architects. This was the most important building project of my life, and every detail mattered. I designed the main counseling center with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the ocean. Transparency and light, I explained to my team, as metaphors for truth and clarity. Women who'd been manipulated in darkness deserved to heal in spaces flooded with natural light. The corridors were deliberately wide, 12 feet across instead of the standard 8, ensuring no one would ever feel trapped or cornered. Each therapy room had 2 exits, giving clients control over their ability to leave. The temporary housing building included private rooms rather than dormitory-style arrangements, because dignity meant having your own space, your own door. You could lock your own window to look out of when you needed to think. Each room had a small desk built into the design, a place for women to write, to plan, to dream about futures they were building for themselves. The legal aid office occupied its own structure designed to feel professional and empowering, rather than institutional. I wanted women to feel like they were meeting with their attorneys, not supplicants begging for help. The job training facility included workshops for various skills, but also creative studios spaces where women could discover talents they'd never had permission to explore when their identities were defined entirely by family roles. The project consumed me in the best possible way. I worked 12-hour days reviewing materials, consulting with therapists and legal experts about how space could support their work, testing lighting and acoustics to create environments that felt safe without feeling sterile. Ethan would find me at my drafting table late at night, surrounded by revised plans and sample materials, completely absorbed in solving problems of how architecture could facilitate healing. The media narrative began to shift. Early coverage had focused on the scandal, the courtroom drama, the society family destroyed by fraud and manipulation. But as construction progressed and word spread about the foundation's mission, reporters started calling me for different reasons. Architecture journals wanted to feature the project's innovative design for trauma-informed spaces. Nonprofit publications interviewed me about sustainable funding models. Psychology Today ran an article about how physical environments could support recovery from family abuse. I gave talks at universities and professional conferences, not about revenge or legal battles, but about how we can transform pain into purpose. How the worst things that happen to us can become the foundation for helping others. The beach house that Diana tried to give to Vanessa that I'd fought so hard to reclaim was becoming something far more valuable than any private residence could ever be. Groundbreaking happened on a foggy morning in early spring, 18 months after my wedding. Local officials attended along with representatives from domestic violence organizations and women's advocacy groups. I stood with a ceremonial shovel, looking at the land that held so much history of harm, knowing we were about to build something that would help hundreds of women find their way out of situations like mine. The construction took 4 months. I visited the site almost daily, watching the structures rise from architectural drawings into actual buildings where actual healing would happen. And then 2 weeks before the scheduled opening, a visitor came to my office, someone I hadn't seen since that day in the courthouse when everything had been revealed. And then one day a visitor came, someone I hadn't seen since the courthouse. Vanessa stood in my office doorway, looking like someone I barely recognized. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup that had defined her for as long as I could remember. She wore simple jeans and a plain white button-down shirt. Her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her face clean of everything except basic moisturizer and maybe a touch of mascara. She looked younger somehow, or maybe just more real, stripped of the performance that had always surrounded her like armor. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice quiet and uncertain in a way Vanessa's voice had never been before. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. She sat carefully, her hands folded in her lap, not the confident posture of someone who owned every room she entered, but the tentative positioning of someone who knew they were on uncertain ground. "I've been following the Foundation's progress," she began. "The articles about what you're building, the mission statement, all of it. It's incredible, Camille. What you're creating from everything that happened." "Thank you," I said, keeping my voice neutral, waiting to see where this was going. "I sold my condo last month, the one in Los Angeles." She reached into her bag and pulled out a cashier's check, sliding it across my desk. "It's not much. After the mortgage and the realtor fees, it came to $42,000. I want to donate it to the Rivers Foundation." I looked at the check, then back at her face. "Vanessa, this is everything you have left." "I know. That's why I want to give it. Because words are cheap and I've spent my whole life saying pretty things that meant nothing. This is real. This is me trying to make actual amends for what I did to you." I picked up the check, studying her signature at the bottom. "Why now? You could have kept this money, started over somewhere new, rebuilt your life." "I am rebuilding my life, just not the way I would have before." She took a breath and I could see her gathering courage for whatever she needed to say next. "I've been working at a dental office in West Hollywood for the past 14 months. I'm a receptionist. I answer phones, schedule appointments, file insurance paperwork. It's the first real job I've ever had, and I'm terrible at it, but I'm learning." The image of Vanessa, who'd spent her entire adult life as a society fixture and influencer working a reception desk, was almost impossible to process. How did that happen? After the courtroom thing, after watching Mom completely fall apart and understanding my role in all of it, I realized I had no actual skills. Nothing I could do that had value. So I started at the bottom. The dental office hired me because they needed someone immediately, and I was willing to work for minimum wage. My coworkers are mostly in their 20s, and they have no idea who I am or what happened. To them, I'm just Vanessa, the older woman, who's still figuring out how to use the scheduling software. There was no bitterness in her voice, just honest assessment. This wasn't the Vanessa who'd laughed at my wedding and told me to relax, it was just a house. This was someone who'd been broken down and was trying to rebuild herself into something different. "The donation is generous," I said carefully. "But why are you really here?" "I want to volunteer at the foundation once it opens." She spoke quickly now, as if afraid she'd lose her nerve. "Not in any kind of leadership role or public position. Just whatever you need. Administrative work, cleaning, organizing supplies, setting up rooms. I don't care. I just want to be part of what you're building, to contribute something real, instead of just taking like I always have." I sat back in my chair, studying her. "You understand this would mean being around women who've been manipulated by their families. Women whose stories might sound uncomfortably familiar." "I know. And maybe that's part of why I need to do this. To understand what I participated in from the other side. To see the real damage that kind of manipulation causes." She met my eyes directly. "I can't give you back the years I stole or the reputation I damaged. I can't undo standing at your wedding and laughing while Mom humiliated you. But I can give you this real work, real commitment, and real change. Not performed for social media or to make myself look good, but because it's the right thing to do." I considered her words, weighing them against years of rivalry and hurt. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep Vanessa out of this space I was building to maintain the boundaries that protected me from further harm. But another part recognized something I'd learned through my own journey: people could change, but only if they were willing to do the actual work of transformation. "If you volunteer here, you start at the bottom," I said finally. "You'll be supervised like any other volunteer. You won't get special treatment because you're my sister. You won't get credit or recognition. And if I ever see you posting about this on social media, using the foundation to rebuild your image or brand yourself as reformed, you're done. This has to be about the work, not about you." "I understand," Vanessa said immediately. "I deleted all my social media accounts 8 months ago. I don't want to be that person anymore, the one who performed her whole life for other people's approval. And you understand that I'm not ready to forgive you. That this doesn't fix our relationship or make us close again. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to try to earn it. But I want to do something meaningful with my life instead of just existing. And if that means scrubbing floors at a foundation built from the ruins of what our family did to you, then that's what I want to do." I looked at this woman who'd been my rival since childhood, who'd participated in my humiliation, who'd stolen credit for my work. And for the first time, I didn't see Vanessa the golden child or Vanessa the fraud. I saw someone who'd finally understood the cost of living a borrowed life and was trying, however imperfectly, to build something real. "We open in 2 weeks," I said. "Be here on Monday morning at 8. Wear comfortable clothes and shoes. You'll be helping set up the intake office and learning our systems. The volunteer coordinator will assign your duties." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This isn't kindness. It's a chance to prove whether your change is real or just another performance. Time will tell which one it is." She nodded and stood to leave. At the door, she paused. "I know you probably won't believe this, but I'm proud of what you're building. Not just the foundation, but who you've become. You could have destroyed all of us completely, and you would have been justified. Instead, you built something that will help people. That takes more strength than revenge ever could." For once, I didn't see my enemy. I saw someone who finally understood the price of taking what isn't yours. The Rivers Foundation opened on a perfect California morning, 2 years to the day after my wedding. The sky was cloudless, the ocean calm, and sunlight streamed across the campus I'd spent 18 months building. Local officials sat in the front rows of white chairs we'd arranged on the main lawn. Representatives from domestic violence organizations, legal aid societies, and women's advocacy groups filled the middle sections. Media clustered near the back with their cameras and notebooks. I scanned the VIP section as I approached the podium, noting the faces of people who'd supported this vision. Ethan sat in the front row, his expression proud. Michael Brennan from Rivers Restoration Group was there along with my legal team and the foundation's first employees. But the 2 chairs I'd reserved for my parents remained conspicuously empty. I'd sent them invitations because it felt right, a gesture toward closure, if not reconciliation. I hadn't expected them to come. I was about to begin my prepared remarks when I saw movement at the back of the crowd. Diana emerged from behind the media section, walking slowly toward an empty seat in the last row. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. Her hair had gone completely gray and hung simply to her shoulders. She wore a plain navy dress, no jewelry, no makeup beyond what was necessary. Arthur walked beside her, his hand supporting her elbow, both of them moving like people who'd aged beyond their years. They didn't approach the VIP section. They simply found seats among the general attendees and sat quietly. Diana's hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the buildings I'd created. I delivered my speech about the Foundation's mission about creating spaces where women could escape manipulation and rebuild their lives with dignity. I thanked the donors and volunteers and community partners who'd made this possible. And then came the media questions. A reporter from the Chronicle raised her hand. "Ms. Rivers, everyone knows this foundation was inspired by your own family situation. Can you talk about how personal experience shaped this project?" Before I could answer, Diana stood. The movement was sudden enough that heads turned throughout the crowd. She walked toward the microphone we'd set up for audience questions, her steps measured and deliberate. I should have been alarmed, should have worried about what she might say, but something in her posture told me this wasn't an attack. "May I?" she asked, her voice quiet, but carrying across the suddenly silent crowd. I nodded, stepping back from the podium. Diana faced the cameras and the crowd, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. "My name is Diana Rivers. I'm the mother who manipulated, defrauded, and publicly humiliated my daughter. I'm not here asking for forgiveness or seeking redemption. I'm here to tell the truth." She paused, and I could see her hands shaking slightly. "I was never Camille's mother in the ways that mattered. I was her warden. I caged her because I was caged by my own insecurity about belonging, about being worthy of love. This foundation exists because I failed, because I let my fears turn me into someone who hurt the people who should have been able to trust me most." The crowd was absolutely still. Reporters were writing frantically but silently, not wanting to miss a word. "I'll spend whatever time I have left," Diana continued, tears beginning to stream down her face, "trying to ensure that other women don't suffer from people like me, from parents who manipulate, who steal, who cage their children's potential because they're afraid of their own inadequacy." She stepped back from the microphone, her statement complete. No excuses, no justifications, just raw accountability delivered in front of witnesses who would carry it into the world. I walked over to where she stood. Every eye in the crowd followed me, waiting to see what would happen next. Diana looked at me with an expression that held no expectation, no demand for a particular response. She'd spoken her truth and was prepared to accept whatever came. "Thank you for the truth," I said quietly. "If you want to volunteer here, you can. Not as my mother, but as someone who understands the harm that family manipulation causes." Diana nodded, unable to speak, tears still falling. She returned to her seat beside Arthur, who wrapped his arm around her shoulders. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was acknowledgement that healing could take many forms, that accountability was the first step toward change, and that sometimes peace meant accepting complexity rather than demanding simple resolutions. The ceremony continued. We cut the ribbon, toured the facilities, introduced the staff who would run the programs, and then, as evening approached and most of the guests departed, Ethan and I stood on the foundation's deck overlooking the ocean. "You can see where we got married from here," Ethan observed, pointing to the spot down the coast where the estate stood. "I know. I designed it that way." I leaned against him, feeling the warmth of the setting sun on my face. I wanted to be able to see where it started to remember what brought me here. "You didn't just win," Ethan said softly. "You transformed everything. The house they tried to steal became healing for hundreds of women. The reputation they tried to damage became a platform for justice. The family that tried to break you became a lesson in accountability and change." Vanessa appeared from inside the building, clipboard in hand. She'd spent the entire day working intake protocols and organizing administrative systems, doing the invisible work that made everything else possible. "Camille. There's a woman here with her 3 children. She just left her husband, who controlled all their finances. She doesn't have anywhere to go." I nodded and followed Vanessa inside, ready to help someone else fight the battle I'd once fought, to offer the resources and support that privilege had given me, and that this foundation would now provide to others. As I walked through the building I'd designed, past the counseling rooms where Diana would soon begin her own therapy, past the gardens where Arthur had planted flowers that were just beginning to bloom, past the offices where Vanessa worked quietly without recognition or praise. I understood what victory really meant. They took my house, I built my peace, and they'll never forget how I turned their cruelty into something beautiful. They lost their empire. I built my peace, and in the end they didn't just pay, they learned. And that was the greatest victory of all. If this story moved you, if Camille's journey from humiliation to triumph resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Your support means everything to this channel. But more importantly, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced family betrayal? Have you watched someone steal credit for your work or try to diminish your achievements? How did you handle it? Did you choose revenge, forgiveness, or something in between? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's going through the same thing right now. And here's a question to think about. Do you think Camille made the right choice by showing Diana mercy at the end? Or should she have pursued criminal charges all the way? There's no wrong answer, but I'm genuinely curious what you think. Let's discuss in the comments. Thank you for listening to Camille's story. Remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's building something so beautiful that it makes cruelty look small by comparison. Until next time, take care of yourselves.